Okay. So here we are again, resuming. The internet went out, so here we are once again. Again. All right. So hopefully we can get people back in here. Dang. Hi, Matt. I took a screenshot of the questions that we had from the previous stream before it was interrupted, and I forgot to save it. So I don't have those questions. But we're just going to start from scratch here because the internet went out and now here we are. So anybody who was here before, if you are here again now, see here, if you were here before, please state your questions because I lost them. Okay. Thanks to you, I get praised a lot about my pronunciation by natives. I really need progress. Thanks for your help. Oh, fantastic. Good. That's my goal, right? That is my exact goal. So much so that I want to basically make it to where you don't need a pronunciation teacher. That is why my course is free. You probably will need some form of feedback at some point, but you can just get that from a regular native, of course. They don't have to be a teacher. Hello, Curious Soul. Welcome back to the live stream that we are now continuing. I took a screenshot of the questions that we had, but I decided to reboot my computer and forgot to save that screenshot. So unfortunately, I don't have the questions that you had posted before. So I know I was finishing up the explanation between like have lived and have been living. I don't know where that got cut off. But the main point, the biggest thing there is I haven't actually consciously thought about that, like how to explain that difference in like a really easy way. Yeah, between the present perfect and present perfect continuous. So in case it got cut off, welcome, David. You didn't miss out on much, no, because the internet had a problem, and this is the second attempt at live streaming today. But anyway, to very briefly sort of go back to the analogy that I was using because I don't know where that got cut off. If you imagine if you have like a nail, right? You put a nail into the ground and you tie a string to it, and you pull that string out. So like as you pull it out, you're like present moment, right? As the present moment goes forward, the string continues to go out. That's the present perfect. Um, and then the present perfect continuous, right? Obviously it's something that started in the past, like for the present perfect, it started in the past and it's continuing into the present in some way, whether that's your experience, like I have been to Japan, or whatever, or it's something that like I have read for an hour, right? Either you have that experience in your life or for the last hour you read. And you might stop there, you might not stop there, right? But the point is that it started in the past, it's continuing until the present moment when you say it. Where the continuous, right? It's like obviously it's been continuing through that whole time. But that's why in a lot of cases, depending on the context, the difference in meaning between the two will be so small that it actually doesn't matter. Like if I say I have read for an hour or I've been reading for an hour, it's the same thing. Except I have read for an hour could also be interpreted as like sometime in my life, I have the experience of reading for an hour. So yes, hello music from Belarus. Very nice. Welcome to the chat. Let me know if you have any questions about anything. So it's a tough question, and I basically don't have a nice, good, easy answer for that, but I am going to be exploring that in the verb book that I write in the future, whenever I get to that. And I'll be talking about like the difference in feeling between them as well. Um, so yeah, FIDA or FIDA. I'm not sure how I should pronounce that. Could be either way in English. How can I fix my mistakes by myself? Grammar mistakes. That is a very, very fantastic question. Um, you're welcome, curious soul. Uh, grammar mistakes. Fixing things by yourself. I'm always trying to explore new things on how to do this and whatnot. One thing that might be useful to look up is what was his name? I already forgot his name because he's one of the newer polyglots that I found on YouTube. It's right there. I can't think of it. I see his face. Anyway, if I think of his name, oh, Robin McPherson. I'm pretty sure that's it. Robin McPherson. Um, interview method. Interview method. I don't know if in that video he talks specifically about it. I don't remember, but he has a couple videos talking about like how he practices speaking by himself as a beginner. And and I think he talks a bit about like error correction and things like that. So there's not necessarily like one answer here, but general advice would be that at least occasionally, say like maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks or something, you do get feedback from another person, preferably a native speaker. Um, and but at the same time, this is the thing about mistakes. Obviously, we don't want to make them, but you have to make them. Okay, it's like if I tell you, say you don't know how to play the guitar, and I give you a guitar, and I say, "Here, play Stairway to Heaven." you know, you're gonna be like, "Okay," and you're not gonna be able, like, even if you try, you're not gonna do anything. You're gonna make a ton of mistakes. Um, so the mistakes are going to happen as you get used to the language. It's language is something that you get used to. Okay, a new language is something that you get used to over time. Now, when it comes to fixing grammar mistakes by yourself, number one, make sure you're getting lots and lots of input because actually, right, and that's especially listening, but also reading, and make sure you're not using subtitles. I know you're asking about fixing your grammar mistakes, which is output, but trust me, this is 100% relevant. Um, Watch as much as you can, get as much input as you can, because the more that you get the language into your brain, the more you're going to start developing an ear for what sounds good and what doesn't sound good. And I'm talking about a lot of exposure, a lot of exposure. Like you think that you might be doing enough, you're probably not doing enough. Um, and again, that's easier said than done, but that's one thing. Make sure you're getting as much input as you can. Um, but on the actual output side of it, um, if you are, say, just starting to speak the language, right? Even if you're not a complete beginner in the language, like say you haven't really spoken very much, so your speaking is at a beginner level, you need very few corrections. Okay. And any good teacher will tell you this. A really, really good teacher, if they start with you as a beginner, they're not going to give you a lot of corrections. They're going to give you some big point corrections, like with maybe certain tenses or whatever, or certain things, but they're not going to correct every little mistake you make because number one, there would be way too many things to correct, and that would just like destroy your self-confidence as well as interrupt the flow that you're trying to very painfully create in the language. You need to get used to just producing the language, right, and letting it come out, which is why speaking to yourself can be really, really useful even if there are mistakes. Okay, so depending on your level of speaking ability, if it's on the lower end, like say up to the like halfway through the intermediate level and below, you need to be comfortable with the fact that you're going to make some mistakes. And if you're paying attention to the language, if you're continuing to learn things, if you're getting lots of input, you're learning new vocabulary, you're constantly trying to improve, then you're not really going to get stuck with any like permanent mistakes or anything. Um, so don't worry too much about that. It is possible that could happen, but Um, that's why you do want to get at least some occasional feedback from a native speaker. As long as you're really engaged and like trying to learn and trying to improve, not just blah blah blah, just speaking, um, then you won't really have any permanent mistakes, most likely. Um, it's much more important just to get the mechanical you like get used to the mechanical production of speaking the language and having your thoughts come out in the language. Um, Once you reach sort of that intermediate level, especially the upper intermediate level, then say from a teacher's perspective, if you were working with a teacher, that's when we start correcting some more mistakes that, because by then you probably have like the most of the tenses or a lot of the tenses are, pretty good. Maybe you still have some mistakes. It's okay, whatever. But we're going to start maybe correcting some other things that are sort of medium importance, focusing a lot on your communication, making sure that you're still, very understood. And then when you get up into that advanced level, that is when you want to try to correct every little tiny mistake, whether that's a teacher giving you corrections or you correcting yourself and trying to find your own mistakes. So if you're not at the advanced speaking level, I don't care what your grammar knowledge is. I don't care what your listening ability is. If your speaking level is not at the advanced level where you have a pretty good flow already, um, then you should not be worrying about every little tiny mistake. Okay, only when you get to that level, that's when you deal with all the little tiny mistakes, like the a lot of the prepositions, the articles, things like that. Now, my approach to the prepositions, the logic of prepositions, is a completely new thing that I think can't. Well, actually, I don't just think I know from testing it on some of my students. That will help to fix that part of the language for you, and drastically improve your ability to use English, not lose English, use English. Um, and so, one thing, this is kind of out of left field, kind of random, but if, say, like if you were to read my book, The Logic of Prepositions, Logic of English Prepositions, that approach doesn't work for everybody. Not everybody likes it. But if you try to approach it in a way of like trying to build the feeling for the grammar, and trying to figure out like, okay, like why is this used in all these cases? Like there has to be some sort of core idea, which I discovered there is. Um, and if you approach it that way, instead of just trying to like, okay, this is the grammar rule, or oh, in this case, yeah, that's right. It's an exception, and so I have to say this instead. It's like all that's knowledge. That's not going to help you speak. Okay, knowledge is not skill. That's you have to separate those two. Knowledge is useful and important, but knowledge is not skill. Um, so if you try to approach the grammar in a different way instead of just memorizing rules and then trying to use those rules, that's not how you learn how to speak. You learn how to speak by speaking as much as you can, making a bunch of mistakes, and then also I would say that like with my logic of prepositions approach, I'm also going to do the same thing with verbs later, approaching the grammar in a way where you're trying to sort of build a feeling for how it works instead of trying to memorize static, boring rules. Because the rules are just a description of how the language is used. They don't tell you how the language is, they tell you how the language is used in real life. And it's just a description. Okay. It's like if I describe to you how to ride a bike, that would be the grammar, right? Or if I describe to you the physics of how riding a bike works and how you keep your balance, that's grammar. Okay. And you can memorize all of that and pass a test 100% A plus, and then you get on a bike and what's going to happen? You're going to fall. I can almost guarantee you're going to fall. um, because you have to get on that bike and you have to ride it. Or same thing with a car. You can know how the engine works. It's not really going to help you drive it. Okay. Um, so unfortunately, there's no really easy answer here, but as long as you're paying attention, you're always trying to improve, you're trying to learn new things, you're maybe approaching the grammar in a way where you're trying to build a feeling for it, and then you're at least getting some occasional feedback from other people, you should be fine. Um, Recording yourself can also help too, because a lot of the time, right, when you're trying to speak, your brain is using so much processing power, especially in the early stages, just to like think of the words and put them together, that if you record yourself and then you go take a break, listen to it later, you're going to have more resources to listen to what you did. And you'll probably notice some mistakes you won't notice because you don't know them yet, right? You don't know their mistakes. But you will also start to notice some things and you'll be like, oh, hey, yeah, I made that mistake. I made that mistake. I made that mistake. And you might make some mistakes a billion times, especially like with the articles and the prepositions and stuff. It's normal. Okay. Don't try to get everything perfect. If you want perfection, you got to get to the advanced level first. Okay. If you're not at the advanced level, perfection is impossible for your speaking skills. Okay. It's just the way it is. Unfortunately, I hate it because I don't want to make mistakes either. It's just the way it is. So understand that and just, be comfortable with the fact that you are going to make mistakes. That would be my general advice. I hope that is useful. um, but Matt, can you slowly explain how to pronounce words like human, huge, and hue or hue? I struggle with the hue part. Okay, so yeah, this is not particularly complicated. So we have the H sound, right? It's just breath. And in these particular words, they're spelled U, but we know sometimes there's words that spelled with U that are spelled with U that actually have a Y sound before the U part. And there might be a pattern there. I don't know, like cure is another one, although that's spelled with a U, but the way I pronounce it is with just an instead of a U. So, that's another thing. But either way, sometimes there's a random Y in there. And we say human, okay? So you're going to be, the H is just air, okay? It's just breath. And it will take on the shape of the sound after it. Okay. Now, in this case, the sound after it isn't ooh, it's y, right? Because we have this Y sound. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to go into the Y position. Okay. Like we're going to say ye, right? But instead of having that voice come through for a Y sound, we're just going to start with the breath. That's it. You're just doing a voiceless Y. Okay. This is why I call the H the voiceless vowel consonant, because it usually just takes the position of the vowel sound that's after it, but with no voice. It's just breath. So we're going to do a voiceless Y, and then we're going to, without moving the position, we're going to start the voice so that we hear the y as a voice sound, and then go into ooh, just like you, but with a voiceless Y in front of it, so an H sound, right? You, he, so I'm doing. I'm not moving my tongue. Just he, you, and then you just have to get the lips and the tongue coordinated as you move into that Y or that oo sound, and there you go. Okay, human, huge, hue. Notice the lips; they naturally kind of want to come up a little bit, and then for the hue, and then as we start that U, right? Because that's what U does in English. It doesn't go. It's not ooh. We don't say ooh, 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 right? We say ooh, ooh. Faster speed, it doesn't have to be as much, or more lazily, it doesn't have to be as much. But there's this tendency to kind of come up a little bit and then around, and it's not just out; it's kind of around. So, if I really enunciate it, human, human. So the lips have a big part to play, but if you're just saying this normally without super clear enunciation, human, hue, hue, hue. So it doesn't have to be as much. Human, human, huge, 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 hue, hue, hue. Okay. Um, Moving on. Do you pronounce there and there the same? Do I? There and there, yes, I do. Now, one of these, I'm pretty sure it's the apostrophe re version. It's supposed to be like there or something, but the reality is, there's actually 2 points here. So number one, okay, so there's there, there, there. All three of these are pronounced exactly the same. By the way, it's also the same for this. Where, and where. Those are also pronounced exactly the same, except instead of the PH in front, there's a W in front. And it's the exact same vowel, air. Okay. Now, these the vowel sounds that are used here I would write it this way. It's the R-colored third vowel, like bed, but with an air. And think it was Matt asked recently if instead of doing plus we could do like the start of a, which is a little bit higher than plus so not the whole diphthong like air, but just the start of that, like air. And yes, you can. They both sound perfectly fine. In fact, I would probably say I use both of them. Uh, and although for the there, technically one of them is probably supposed to be a little bit more towards like like their, because it's they plus right? But in reality, we simply just sort of condense it a bit and say it the same as the other two. There. Same. Don't even worry about it. Good question. Yes. And I recommend, which it's a very common thing. I would say probably like 80, 90% of speakers do that. Maybe even all speakers. I don't even know, but it's just part of normal speech. So it's not something that's informal or anything like that. We just tend to pronounce them the same. Occasionally, maybe you'll hear them pronounce like say apostrophe re. Maybe somebody, if they're really enunciating, say like, no, they're not going. Right. Maybe they'll kind of say it like that because they're really emphasizing they plus but they're still contracting, right? That's something that's possible, but generally you're going to hear them pronounced exactly the same. So that's the answer. At Matt. Oh, I see David got a new color for the YouTube member thingy. Yeah, because you passed the 1 month mark. Good job. Anyway, become a member, support the channel. Some people on the East Coast and Donald Trump don't pronounce the H and just say them like human, huge. But yeah, saying the HY cluster is a standard way, I believe. Yeah, good point, Dave. And so always so insightful. The one of the things, remember, because we also know that the H, even if it's at the start of a stressed syllable, it's a little less likely, but in the flow of speech, it's possible, especially at faster or in lazier speed, faster speech or in lazier speech, it's possible to drop the H at the end of a word if it's supposed to be there. Some words just have a silent H normally, but we know, like, for example, with her, if I say, I don't know, tag her, I don't know, tag her, or give her the money, give her, right? It sounds exactly like the noun giver. And that can also happen, again, at the start of a stressed syllable in a content word. It's just maybe a little less likely. And so actually, I noticed somebody do this the other day. They said human, but they dropped the H because they were connecting a consonant through the H to a vowel. And I forget exactly what they said, but if I say like, if I say because he's human, right? He's human because he's human because he's human. At really fast speed, you just drop that H, connect the Z. But if you're enunciating, you say because he's human, that's not right. Okay, you can't enunciate that because when we go towards slower, more enunciated speed or emphasize speech, those sounds want to come back, right? And so it's going to start to sound weird. So always keep that in mind. But even in words like this, it is still possible to drop the H depending on what's before it. This is real speech, guys, real speech, not the clean technical things that they teach you, in books and in most classes that you might try to attend or whatever. This is how real speech works. So, and you never have to do that. You could always say like he's human, but it's going to slow you down. It might make you sound a little unnatural. So that's again why I say enunciation is a tool. We use it when we need to. Anyway, what is the possessive form of somebody else? Is it somebody's else? Or that's a good question. Yeah, so somebody else's. Somebody else's. And if the technical grammar is the other one, I'd be very, very surprised because that just sounds strange to me. Somebody's else. Yeah, it should be somebody else's. And I know that's a good question because it's like, well, right, because it's the person, so should it go on the somebody or is it the else? Because else just means other, right? Another person. But where does the apostrophe go? So we look at it as like one piece. Somebody else is like not just somebody, but somebody else, some other person than this person, right? So we put it at the end. I found on the English phonology wiki page that it's transcribed as H plus liquid J, but it's not just shorthand for the sound Germans used in ich, and it does exist in English too. Yeah, the I can't. I never mastered that sound quite because I didn't spend quite enough time with German. But the sound in German um, is definitely not what we're using here for human. Um, uh, if a speaker were to do that, human. I can imagine some speakers maybe kind of move more towards that German sound, like the ch sound or the soft ch sound, um, and it would probably sound fine. But the way that I do it and the way that I would expect people to do it, it's not quite the same, but it is very similar to that sound in German. Um, as I said, that's why I describe it as a. It's like you're doing a voiceless Y with that H, and then just activating the voice into the Y. Like I think that that is a lot simpler and makes a lot more sense instead of like you know looking at all this like liquid J, which I guess I know it's a Y in IPA, but it's like okay, whatever. um, like that is not very learner friendly for like the average person. So I would never describe it that way. Um, anyway, did answer my question. I just came back to the stream. Yeah, so Meadow, I don't think I got to your question before. So if you can restate that, then I can probably answer it. Maybe I did, and I don't remember. I don't think I did. Um, so sorry. Unfortunately, I had an internet problem, but which apparently the internet was out this morning before I woke up. My roommate told me, so there's a chance that maybe it will go out again. Hopefully not, but if it does, I mean, depending on how far we get, we might just end. But I'll give you guys a little um, text update on the channel community tab of what's going to go on. Okay. But I'm not sure if it also applies to GA. It says that for British accents. Yep, I'd say that's a good way to look at it. Personally, I'm most familiar with through Japanese, where it appears with hyakyuhyo. Yeah, makes sense. Hyakyuhyo, yeah. Which I probably don't do those perfectly in Japanese because, like, that's the thing that little tiny mini rant here, guys. It pisses me off so much because, like, for example, like, okay, like Japanese people. If there's any Japanese people watching this, you guys like yes from a western perspective your language is hard, but you gotta like if you're gonna teach Japanese, if you're a Japanese teacher, you gotta understand that we can get it. Okay, we can get it. Matt versus Japan is a perfect example. um, See, I naturally gravitate towards pronunciation, and so but I didn't have any like formal training. I just kind of like, okay, I took some Japanese classes and like there's like the sounds and I'm hearing them. And so, some of them are a bit off. I never got all like the little technical things. There's a channel I found, I think called Dogen or something like that, where he goes really into depth on like the phonetics and stuff. And it's actually super useful. Um, but uh, the like, you'll never hear about pitch accent in a Japanese class, like ever, right? When pitch accent is like super important. Like if you want to sound Japanese, you can master all the sounds. If you don't get the pitch accent, you're not going to sound Japanese. Like you can have like super advanced, no problem communicating in the language, and you still won't sound Japanese because of the pitch accent. And it really pisses me off because It seems like I agree with Matt in Matt vs. Japan from the YouTube channel. It's probably that like Japanese teachers, or I mean Japanese people in general, think that their language is like the hardest language in the world, and so they're like, well, you don't need to know all the technical details of like what pitch accent is and stuff. You just need to try to like communicate in the language, which is at the bottom line that is the most important. But for people who actually care about pronunciation and stuff, it's like you're not even giving us one of the keys to having a really good pronunciation, and it's like you have no right to do that. Like you should give us the information that we need straight from day one so that we know about it. But like I never heard about pitch accent until I found Dogen. And I was like, what the heck is pitch accent? Oh no, it was actually from what was it? Japanese Pod 101. I randomly heard it on one of their things, and then I heard it from Dogen after that. But anyway, rant over. H is just air passing through the glottis, but the Y sound shifts the articulation toward the place where the Y is pronounced, palatal part of the mouth. Exactly, 100%. Thanks for your answer, no problem. Y sound, wait, what? Yeah, Y sound, okay. So much better explaining this. I guess. But thank you, yes. David should sound 100 like a native by now, 100% native. Well, I recently had the pleasure of hearing how David sounds. Because David is also a supporter, big YouTube supporter, also Patreon supporter. She, he. See, I don't know. I don't know what you prefer. I'm gonna say he. He. Oh, that's my thought. Yeah. That's my thought. Oh yeah. So we have a monthly Skype meeting because he's at a particular tier of support where there's access to that. And so I can tell you that Davin's pronunciation is amazing. The only thing that I noticed was like the P sound, and that's pretty much it. Like maybe there's some other minor things, but Davin sounds native-like, definitely in the realm of native-like. Exactly like a native, I wouldn't be able to give 100% because I did notice that P, but like 99% native, yes. Davin is fantastic, absolutely fantastic. But Davin says, no, I'm never satisfied. I get it. I understand that, yeah. That's exactly what I was thinking. A bunch of retracted messages. Anyway, no, I don't know what Gabriel's referring to with what I was thinking. Oh, probably about the Davin should sound like a native by now. So yes, Davin has done a very good job. Hey Josh, is the AR in start ever pronounced as in fast speech? A good question. My first thought is no. But let's see if real messy speech would sound okay. Let's see. Start. Get started. Get started. No, absolutely not. 100% no. Because the the sound in start is ah. It's way back here. If you try to do up here with stared. I'll stare at it. It that sounds like this word. Like I stare at something for a long time. It would be a completely different word. It does also sound a little bit maybe like it could be part of a Korean pronunciation, and or maybe a bit of a Southern pronunciation. But for okay, I'm shooketh because your European CH sounds very accurate. Well, thank you. Dozy, but for Japanese. But, well, thank you. I think the way that we would probably normally say it is like you're the Dogen of English. You say Dogen is you, but for Japanese, it's like it just feels so weird because we would probably look at that the other way. But yeah, I mean, I get what you say, what you're saying. No problem. Uh, which I mean, that's high praise. Like Dogen is his channel is fantastic, absolutely fantastic for Japanese learners. Um, but I wouldn't necessarily put myself on the same level as him. And we're not exactly the same either because what do I have here? Uh, um, yeah, I have to respond to this. This is a bit of an important message. But what was I saying? Yeah, because I think sometimes depending on like how radically different a particular language is, going a little bit deeper into some of the phonetics and stuff can be very, very useful. Um, because it's something that's just so different. So, like, say if you're a Japanese speaker and you're learning English, knowing a little bit more of the technical things than I think are generally useful could be useful for you. I still don't think it's like required or anything, but my style is to not be very technical, to explain things in a different way that's maybe easier to understand and whatever without being inaccurate. And then of course I have all my hacks and stuff that make things easier for guys. But um, I have a bit of a different style, of course. But uh, thank you for the very high praise because I hold Dogen in very high esteem for what he does in Japanese. And if you're putting me on the same level as him, well, I guess I'm doing something right. I have to respond to this really quick. Um, in fact, I actually have to take a picture of something. I will be right back. Sorry, guys. Okay, sorry about that. We have a toilet seat that is quite old because this house is kind of old, and there's like a big crack in it. And I guess the guy who was supposed to come to fix it told and I love this suspense. The guy who's supposed to fix it, I guess maybe there's some sort of mix-up, but I guess he told the realty place that he fixed it, and I texted them this morning saying like we haven't heard about the toilet, and he's like, oh, he fixed it 2 days ago, and I'm like, no, like I just took another picture of it, and I'm like, this is a new picture I just took, broken seat. My roommate haven't seen anybody come by to fix it. So anyway, back to what we were talking about. Is the vowel sound in sock, law, and dog the same? It depends who you ask. It depends who you ask. In my pronunciation, the cot merger, which makes things so much easier and is something that for the last, say, 40 or more years has been moving across the country. So it is actually becoming the standard normal thing that most Americans use, the cot merger. So this is where cot is supposed to be cot, or something like that. And caught, which is supposed to be more like caught, a little bit of the lips, a little bit higher up in the back instead of caught. Okay, they become one, and they're pronounced exactly the same. Where moves back, moves down, one position, lips go away. So we say, what were they? Sock, la, dog. Sock, law, dog. Any little tiny differences that you might notice there me saying them is because of sounds around them, right? So like obviously with sock, I have to go back up into the K, and so it might technically make a very slight difference in the because maybe I don't take the time to get fully into it as I go back up into the K or whatever. But yes, generally speaking, it's a cot merger, same sound. You will still sound neutral. You will still sound very natural. This is one of the hacks that I give you guys, is to use the cot merger to make your life easier. And specifically, just for reference, if you're familiar with IPA, the which moved back, usually looks something sort of like an A. It's not that A, but it's like this with a line in IPA. And then there's what it looks like a C, but it's backwards, so it faces the other way, like opens this way instead of this way. That's the aw. And that aw just completely disappears. It's not a sound. So you have one less sound to learn if you use the cot merger. It makes it so much easier. Anyway, I could just tell you were a Matt Verstappen fan. I love his content too. Yeah, I've seen some of his stuff. I haven't followed the channel a whole lot, but I definitely like his content, and he has some really great ideas and stuff. What was I going to say? I was thinking of him because like he popped into my head because I actually watched an interview that he did with somebody else on somebody else's channel. And I actually don't particularly like that channel. I don't know why it even recommended it to me. It's like what I've learned or whatever. I disagree with that guy on quite a few things, especially diet. But that's a whole different topic. But yeah, he was interviewing Matt vs. Japan because I guess he also speaks Japanese. The what I've learned guy, and it was a really really good interview. It's like an hour long. It was really good. I sat and I just on 2x speed, of course, because I watch everything on 2x speed, and I just sat there straight through it. It was really good. Are these verbs supposed to sound the same as in present? In these cases, I loved that. I worked through, jumped 4. I guess 4, the number 4 could be after that. Talked till. Okay, so are these verbs supposed to sound the same as in present? So you mean like if I were to say love that and loved that, it would sound the same? That's what I assume your question is. Like between the two, would it just come out sounding the same regardless of the tense? The answer would be no, absolutely not. Because then we don't know if it's past tense. Sometimes things like that can happen where like we do have to rely on the context, but there's a little thing happening here, at least with the THs. So let's go through these. So if I say love that, okay, we're gonna go from the to the. Love the. And you can even do like sort of like a dental D, make it flat and say love that, that's fine. But that's all it is. When we do loved and that, see, this is where there's a trick, because since we do have that dental D version, what we will commonly do if there's, say, like a D sound before a voiced TH, if we do the dental D replacement of the TH sound, which everybody here, if this is new to you, what is the dental D or dental T? Watch the lesson on the TH sound and you will learn about that. But what we do if there's a D before a voiced TH, if we use the dental D for the TH, is we're going to stop the D in that position of the dental D for the TH. So again, remember, don't confuse the dental D replacement of the TH with a normal D, which is up here, okay? But in this particular case, if we do that, right, if I say loved that, okay, well, we need that stop. Where there's no stop without the past tense, present tense, and we do that dental D, then we're going to say love that, that. There's no pause or anything between. But if I do past, love that, and in faster speech, it can be harder gap or two, and will generally be not always be clear, but it usually doesn't cause a problem, especially with context. They're not pronounced exactly the same, but they can sound very similar. Same with worked through, except through is a voice th, but also worked, right? It's spelled with ed, but it's just a t sound. Worked, right? Because the k is voiceless, so the ed ending is just a t. So I worked through. Now we have the same thing, except we have a t sound that we can stop, plus a dental t replacement for the voiceless th, and we get the same exact thing. So if I do present tense, work through. In that case, we're actually probably going to stop the k. Work through. Work through. Work through. You could do the dental D there, but because we just stopped the K, we're very likely to actually just do a regular TH there. It just makes it a little easier in this particular combination, so work through. So that's going to sound not a whole lot different, but to a native, it's going to sound very, very different compared to if I had that T there, stopping the T instead of stopping the K, and I say work through, okay? But again, they could come out quite similarly. With jumped and for, okay, so here we have jumped, and because of the M and the P, potentially that ED ending instead of being a T sound because of the P, in faster speech, we might actually just completely skip the P and use the voice of the M to make it a D, jumped. So there's actually two ways to say that. But if I say present tense, jump for, okay, jump for. So I'm sort of like stopping that P, jump for. If I do past tense, jumped for. Okay, we're going to do a T and an F. Like you're going to hear both of those. Or if maybe I drop that P again, this is a special case. It's just because the MP are there, and they're both there, and they're at the end of what would be the end of the syllable in the present tense. If I do jumped for, a little bit of a D sound is possible, but probably we're, for the past tense version, God, I hate that. For the past tense version, we're probably just going to have a little T sound there. And because that P is right before, it's really hard to kind of try to like stop that T in this particular combination. So this is a case where we would most likely just do a weak T sound. I say we stop the P, stop the T. We'll just do a weak T sound. It'll be T to F. Talked till. So again, we have a T sound at the end of talked, and then till. So this actually is gemination. Which, right, gem, well, it comes from the Latin root for like twin, double, right? So it's where you have two of the same sounds repeating. And what happens if we have two of the same sounds repeating and they're stop sounds, like two T's? We stop the first one and then we pronounce the second one, which actually isn't a gemination. And I need to do a little bit more research to finalize my thought on this, but I don't think that gemination actually exists in English. Because the more I think about it, the more I'm like, yeah, it's actually, it's the wrong way to look at it. But anyway, regardless, in this particular case, we're going to stop that first T and then say the second T, talk till. We talk till. Now, if I don't do that and I just do the present tense, we talk till. Talk till. So I'm going to stop the K. Now, the stop K and the stop T can sound super, super similar. And so, in order to make it clear that it's past tense, this is a case where we might choose not to stop the T and actually kind of just like push out a little bit of a T, like talked till, talked till. And that's something that you'll see very commonly, just because in a particular case, it may not be clear if it's past or present because the stop K and the stop T sound super, super similar, even to us natives. Sometimes they sound the same, and it's not clear which one. So that's sort of a special case. But so the last two will probably just push out a little T sound, where the first two, there's the presence of a stop T or stop D, depending on loved or worked, in addition to the possible dental D or dental T, depending on that or through. So there is actually a bit of a difference there, which would be in that extra little stop T or D. So hopefully that answers all your questions and that was clear. Gabriel, if you guys are unmotivated about mastering the American accent, I met a girl who lives in a village in Laos and she's into the British culture and her British accent is incredible and fancy. Fantastic. There you go. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's all kinds of examples and stories of people who, they either sound native like, like they sound really, really, really good. Or there's even quite a few people who can fool natives. And having a bit of talent to get up to that point certainly helps a lot, but I don't think it's absolutely required. It just takes more work. And not everybody's willing to put in that work. That's the other thing. It's like, oh, I want to speak German like a native. And it's like, possible, but are you willing to put in the work? Because it is work. I think that's one reason why talent has such a good reputation. It's because like talent makes things so much easier, right? So people who are talented for a particular thing, number one, they tend to be able to improve faster and more easily, like with relatively less effort, and can maybe potentially higher than somebody without talent, depending on what we're talking about, like say in certain music circles or generally, I just think that because it's so much work for somebody without talent to reach the same really, really, really high level, if you reach that level, like so many people think like, oh, if you don't have talent, you can't do it. And I think generally that's not true. Not everybody can do everything at like the highest level. I wouldn't say that, but in general, for most people to reach, a really good high level, especially in language, I don't think that I think that most people can do that. I don't think there's any problem with that. He, she, also for he. Okay, good. So we have that settled. Love the suspense. Does for gore sound funny? I don't even know what that is. By the way, should I call it a typo, a misspelling, or a mistyping? Interesting question. Okay, so those aren't the same. Now, a mistyping, I'm sure maybe some people use that. I've never heard that or used it myself, but given the fact that now we're typing on keyboards, that word makes sense. I'm not sure which one mistyping would mean, if it's a typo or a misspelling, but typo and misspelling are not the same. A typo is whether it could be typed or actually written, but yeah, no, I guess if it's written, that'd be kind of weird because then you'd have to like intentionally do it by hand. Usually when we're typing, we'll like hit the wrong key or something. So I guess it has to be typing, but in a typo, like how to spell the word, or maybe it could even be some punctuation or whatever it is, but how things should be. But then when somebody reads it, there's like, oh, hey, you misspelled this word. And you're like, oh, it was an accident. A typo is an accident, right? Where a misspelling would be like, okay, if you make a typo, it could be that you misspelled the word. Yes, that would be true. But a misspelling would be, say, let's see, what's a common word that's misspelled? Trying to think. Can't even think of any words right now because I know how to spell. um, what are common words that are misspelled? I don't know. So just a random example because I can't think of anything off the top of my head. But let's say before, right? There's a silent e. So let's say somebody spells it like this, okay, and they think that's how it's supposed to be spelled. That's how they always spell it. That's a misspelling, right? Especially if it's um, an incorrect spelling that many people do, then we say it's a common misspelling, right? Um, so a typo is accidental. A misspelling is something that they think is correct, but it's actually not. You cracked the toe of the I didn't do it. No, it was weird because like I literally went in there and I saw it was cracked and I was like, "What the heck? Like, how did this happen? What is going on?" So I don't know how it happened, but as I said, it's an old house. Okay, back to where we were. Oh yeah, and so the first part of your question, forgore, I don't even know what that's supposed to mean. Is it like forgo with an R sound at the end of it? Like, so it does sound funny to me because I don't even know what it's supposed to mean. Forgore, like what? Um, or it could be, I guess, like forgore. Like that's how we would pronounce those two. Although we would probably reduce for to fur and say forgore, but either way. I have a question about the name of a French company, Mazars, that was in the news for something Trump related recently. I noticed there's a bit of a variation in terms of how Americans pronounce it. Which one of the following sounds following? Which one of the following sound most like what you'd go for when using it in a sentence? Well, so you already got my first impression, Mazars. That's probably how I would try to say it off the bat. So first option, yes, Mazars. Mazars, possible. I can imagine a native trying to do that. Mazers, also possible. If we stress that first syllable, reducing the second one would make perfect sense into an Mazers. Rhymes with gamers. Yeah, so this is a case because like it's not an English word. It's totally unfamiliar. Obviously, it's probably French, I assume, since it's a French company. Um, and remember, in because English has some spelling patterns, but we don't have a phonetic spelling system. If we find words like this, or if we find even if they're English words, but we've never seen them or never heard them before, we can take a good guess at how they might be pronounced, but we won't know how to pronounce them, like until we hear somebody say it. And so a word like this, I just happened to go for Mazars, right? I could have instead said Mazars, like, but one came out of my mouth instead of the other. That's what happened. Because I've never heard it before, so I don't know how it should be pronounced. But Mazars, Mazars, or Mazers, they all sound like perfectly fine ways that a native would try to say that. Yes, all perfectly fine variations. Um, you could even maybe go with like Mazars, but again, we would probably want to reduce the unstressed one. But if you do Mazars, um, or Mazars, but I think that would be less likely. Um, when Paris Hilton approves of something, she often says loves it, and it's always confused the hell out of me because of the third person S in love. Loves it. Yeah, that is very strange. I'm not a particular fan of Paris Hilton, so I don't really know what she says or how she says it. Uh, Sometimes some speakers, this is very uncommon. This isn't a normal thing, but sometimes some speakers will refer to themselves in the third person. So it could be something like that, maybe that's going on. So she's like saying Paris loves it, right? Just referring to herself in the third person, but she's dropping Paris and just says loves it. Um, The only other thing I can think to explain that would be something that I can't explain right now because it's very abstract and it's a way that we can sort of manipulate and play with the language in a grammatically incorrect way. Um, yeah, I don't even know how to describe that. I'll take a rain check on that one. But there's sometimes where we can sort of add an S to the end of a verb to make it like to intentionally make it sound like kind of uneducated and playful in a way. And it's a really weird abstract thing. I wouldn't worry too much about it. It's whatever reason she says it, it's wrong either way, but she says it that way, and so it's just a little quirk of the way that she uses the language. Whatever, like it doesn't matter that much. Sabrina from Italy. Sorry, it took me a moment to acknowledge you here, but yes, from Italy. Interesting. I don't know. I'm sure I have some people from Italy that watch, but I don't think anybody has specifically mentioned that they're from Italy, at least not in the live stream. So welcome, very big welcome to the stream here. If you have any questions, of course, let me know and we can address those. But yes, from Italy. I want to go to Italy someday. Rome, of course. See the Colosseum, all the standard things. But I know that North Italy and South Italy have quite different pronunciations. Like it's kind of becoming almost like two different languages from what I hear, which is very interesting. And I would want to go to the north of Italy and south of Italy just to like hear how people speak differently. Of course, it might help if I knew Italian, which isn't on my list. But since I speak Spanish and I will be learning French and Portuguese, I'll probably be able to understand it anyway. um, yes, thanks with an S. Thanks. Cool. Okay, Gabriel. Yeah, talent is useless without practice. Practice is a lot can outdo someone that has talent. Generally, yes, it's generally true. As I alluded to, I do think that people with talent may have a bit of an advantage, at least in certain skills like music. I think music is a good example where like the person with talent can maybe like if you have somebody with no talent and somebody with talent, if the person with talent doesn't really put in a whole lot of effort and they don't really like do much with it, then the person who puts in the effort with no talent is going to pass them like easily, right? Well, easily, right? They have to put in the hard work, but it's not really it's not a surprise. If somebody with talent, because talent is sort of like a head start, and maybe you can move a little bit faster. So if you think about it like running, it's like they have a starting point ahead of you, and they can run faster than you. So if someone with talent does put in the work and they put in like lifetime, like this is what I want to do, I'm going to become a master of this thing, and it's like their life. And you have somebody with talent and without talent in the same situation with the same mindset. I think in that case, the person with talent can get farther. Like they have a higher point that they can reach than somebody without talent. But that's like optimal top of the top. Like you have the mindset that you want to be the best. Like you want to be, Beethoven, or in sports, like you want to be Michael Jordan, the next Michael Jordan or something. And you put in all that extra effort with the talent, I think you can go farther. But somebody without talent, of course, can pass you if you do have talent. Talent just makes things easier, in my opinion, for the most part. Which also, on my other channel, I'm probably going to make this as my next video. Why mastery is overrated. And I have nothing against mastering. Right, mastery is fantastic. And again, I do think languages are a bit different because like if you learn music, if you learn an instrument, that's something like foreign to you, than if you're learning a language, which is something that you already do in your native language and you're learning another language. And so I think language is kind of special in terms of skill building stuff. But for in general, especially for not language skills, I think that uh, if you get to an upper intermediate level, like you're conversationally fluent, say in a language, which in other skills has the same level, right? Like the upper intermediate level. In any skill, once you reach that upper intermediate level and you have like a nice good flow, even if you still make some mistakes, even if it's not perfect, to somebody who has no skill, like the average person who can't, speak Spanish, or who can't play the guitar, or who can't, whatever. Um, they're going to look at what you're doing, and to them, from their perspective, you seem like a master. You seem like an expert. Now, in your mind, you still have mistakes, you still have things to learn, you still have things to improve, and that's fine. But I think we put way too much emphasis on mastery, because people are like, well, I'm not even going to try to learn an instrument because I'm, 40 years old, and, you know, I'm too old. This whole too old, it pops up in everything. Am I too old to learn a language? Am I too old to learn how to program? Am I too old to learn music? No, 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 no. You're never too old. um, and just all this stuff. Anyway, that's a whole thing. You wait for the video on the other channel, but um, music, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for your minimal pairs videos. Awesome. Although I don't think it should be an apostrophe on pairs, because the minimal pairs don't own the videos. They're just minimal pairs videos. So there's just an S with no apostrophe. Maybe I'm wrong about that in the punctuation, but I'm pretty sure that's right. I'd have to double check. They're extremely helpful. I've been searching for things like that for years. Well, there you go. I am aware that, because I did a little bit of research to see if like other teachers had minimal pairs, because I was just curious. And I did see some teachers that have some videos that do like a little bit of work with minimal pairs. Um, but the way I do it, obviously, is very particular. um, so even as you said, yes, there are some videos on YouTube on that subject, but yours are the most detailed and with the most explanation. Well, thank you. Um, that's what I'm here for. Also, of course, should be a link in the description if you don't have it already. There's the ear trainer software, which has minimal pairs built into it. So you can just choose, what sounds you want to work with, up to 4. And it'll, instead of, having a video where there's a limited number of answers, you can play with it forever, right? You can do E versus I over and over and over and over and over again until you finally really can clearly hear the difference 100% of the time. So, and that's version 1 of the ear trainer. I'm going to make it better in version 2 later, but check that out if you haven't. And hopefully you don't have any problems installing it. A couple people have had some issues. If you don't have Windows 10, you might have a problem, but right now it's only available on Windows because I don't have a Mac yet. Forgot. Okay, so it was a typo. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. So saying for gore or forgar instead of forgot, like, is that the question? I see a lot of people on the internet typing it like he forgore. That number one, I've never seen that, and if that is happening, I have no idea why it's happening. Like, if I were to see like I saw it when you typed it, I didn't even know what it was. Like in context, if I say like, oh yeah, he was gonna do it yesterday, but he forgot about it, and like they typed it that way, not speaking obviously, but they typed it that way, then my brain would say, oh, okay, it's probably forgot. Um, and it should be a T. But to have that be a regular like misspelling rather than just like an accidental typo that you see occasionally, that is extremely strange to me, and I have no idea why that's happening. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Maybe it's I mean, if anybody here is from Gen Z, no offense, but maybe it's a Gen Z thing. I'm a millennial. I'm a little bit older. I'm an old guy. So, God, that's so weird. Anyway, maybe it's a Gen Z thing. But no, it's as far as I know, at least. Maybe I'm just the unhip old man millennial, but it doesn't sound funny or weird to me or anything like that. It's wrong. Doesn't yeah. That talk about talent reminds me of this quote: "Hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard." Exactly, 100%. Yeah, that's the simple way to put it. But if talent works hard, then you got to watch out. Um, Rafael from Brazil. Yes, another Brazilian. Another Brazilian. We have so many Brazilians. Um, so many. Steve is from Brazil. Gabriel's from Brazil. What else do we have here from Brazil? And we have some other Brazilians that usually show up. Some people I'm not even sure if you're from Brazil because you haven't said, and your name looks like it could be Spanish, and so maybe you're from Brazil and I don't know. But yes, welcome, Rafael. Um, it's funny, I'm noticing more and more lately how native speakers add an S to verbs when it shouldn't be there for humorous effect. Yes, like I got to know. Yes, that okay. This is a perfect example of what I was trying to talk about earlier with what I was trying to explain. It's this is it. This is a good example. Okay. Um, as I said, it makes it sound more uneducated. It's kind of playful. It's a weird thing that we do, but this is definitely not something that you want to use in normal speech. Okay, um, it's something that you which my general advice for English learners would just be to be completely ignore it. Like know that it's some weird thing that natives do to sound uneducated and have a certain effect. But you never have to use it. But if you do want to try to use it, definitely pay attention to the way that it's used and the intonation in which it's used, because usually we use a certain intonation with it. Um, but it sounds. I think actually some people from the South speak that way, and that's why we imitate it. And maybe that's just a stereotype. I don't know, but I can very easily imagine like a stereotypical, uneducated Southerner saying like, "Oh, I gots to know," or "I gots to have me some of that," or something like that. Um, and so it's something that we might occasionally just do for effect. Like it just sounds funny, you know. I came up with a short list of additional words I'd like to hear you say, if you don't mind. Okay, targeting the half L thing here. Do they all use the same vowel, or are there any exceptions in your iconic accent? There's nothing iconic about my accent. That would mean I'm not neutral. um, Unfortunately, I have to use the restroom really quick. So you said that. What, did you say that you like the suspense? I don't remember what you said earlier. Something about suspense. Yeah, I love the suspense. So here's some more suspense for you. I'll be right back. And we're back. Okay, so pulp, light bulb, skull, lol, Hulk. Yep, same. Um, and so I didn't include this in the lesson about the sounds that you don't have to learn. So obviously, they say like the L colored schwa and the other high schwa, as I call it, like book. They do exist in the speech of speakers, and just like I caught merger, occasionally I'll use the merge form, realizing I do it. Um, I think that's why words like this. I said, um, but then I realized that I actually just usually am all the same. Sometimes if it's like say skull with L colored schwa, sometimes, but usually I say skull, half L, the sound. Uh, so um, remember, of course, my purpose is to make things easier for you while still sounding natural and neutral, right? Um, and so It just so happens to largely be based off of how I talk because I think that makes it a lot easier. Um, but so it's not wrong to say like pulp, light bulb, dull. You could say it that way if you want, but there's absolutely no reason to. You can just do ul in the back, the dark L or half L sound, pulp, light bulb, skull, lull, hulk. Depending on the sound that's before it, you might hear sounds maybe slightly different, but I would chalk that up to just be say going from light L, dark L, right? Full L, half L. And so I had a little there. That uh, it's very easy to at least somewhat hit the schwa, right? In that case, it might be more likely because like literally we're kind of going as we pull into that half. But there at all. So, um, certain combination sounds might have slight effect on exactly what you hear. And my connection is unstable. So let me know if you hear me fine. Another internet problem. Okay. Um, anyway, yeah, definitely let me know. The internet is still on, so I'm going to assume you still hear me. But so moving on, Hector, what are your thoughts on upspeak or uptalk? I feel like natives use it more than they realize. Yeah, we probably do. Uh, as a normal mode of speaking, there are some speakers who do that, and to us it sounds like Valley Girl speak. Um, but I know there's also some speakers in like New Mexico and in Arizona that do that. Um, and there might be speakers from elsewhere, who knows. But in general, like I think most American native speakers who speak, some form of neutral general American English, um, maybe it's something that can occasionally come into their speech, but I don't think it's not like the default way that we would speak. One thing that you might kind of be pointing to and maybe not realizing it is if you compare, which I'm not an expert on this, this is just something that I saw in a video and I was like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. If you compare, say, the average American speaker to the average British speaker who speaks like received pronunciation or whatever, um, the exact way that we use intonation, even though it's the same language, right? It's English, it's the same language. British people will actually use like certain intonation patterns a little bit differently sometimes than Americans. Um, and so that's more of like a minor subtle thing, I think. But I think Americans, as a whole, whether or not we use uptalk, we do tend to have much more of like a varied intonation, like a lot more ups and downs and maybe like some staircases and stuff that depending on what we're saying and whatever. Where British English, I think, is a little bit more conservative, a little bit more, pinpoint with how they go up and down and all this stuff. And so, yeah, it's part of the American sound. Um, but it's kind of a minor point. Like somebody from one part of the country might use those patterns a little bit differently than somebody from another part of the country. I don't think there's necessarily like one universal way that Americans do that, like as a whole, but maybe there is. I don't know. Anyway, Sabrina, I follow you from a long time, but it is the first time online. I love the American pronunciation. It helps me to understand my favorite music, Linkin Park, Alice in Chains. Yeah, well, good, interesting. Okay, so we have a hard rock fan. Yeah, good. I used to listen to Linkin Park a lot when I was in high school. I don't really listen to him too much anymore because I was never too much of like a really like hard rock type of fan. Uh, but I was into that for a while. I still listen to Evanescence, which is kind of in that same area a bit. Emo music, right? um, but yeah, that's good. Very good. So well, I'm glad that you have been following me. I'm glad that I've been able to help. I'm glad that you decided to join the live stream and start interacting a little bit. That's always very good. Okay. So what would you say are the okay, so it's probably you're gonna say the patterns, change it to some. What would you say are some patterns for when we should go up when speaking? Is it just when we're explaining something and we want to let our interlocutor, God, I hate that word, interlocutor know that we haven't finished the thought? Okay, so first point, interlocutor or interlocutor. I'm not even sure what the stress is supposed to be on that. That is a super, super fancy word that was used in like the 1800s. And nobody, like, unless you're a very educated native and you want to sound fancy, like no native is going to use that word. It's a word that we don't use anymore. We just say the person you're speaking to or speaking with, or like the other person. You want to let the other person know, whatever. Interlocutor, you can use it if you want, but especially in speech, like some people may not even know what that means. Like that's how uncommon it is, and it's an older word. Don't use it. I would recommend don't use it. But anyway, that aside, this is something that like intonation is so dependent on context. It's dependent on a lot of factors. There are some basic standard things like if there's a comma, you're supposed to go up. Okay, that's pretty easy. If there's a period, you're supposed to go down, right? That's exactly it, right? Because which that's actually kind of backwards because the comma is there because it actually reflects speech to an extent. Um, but anyway, like if I say I like it, but I don't know. I like it. Otherwise, I like it. I like it. Right, kind of just falls at the end. It's period. That tells the person we're done with that sentence, right? If I say I like it, and if I just stop there, they're gonna be like, and but what okay, why did you stop? Okay, so that's what it's used a lot for. um, Also, pitch is part of the stress. I know this probably isn't exactly what you're asking, but it can become more of a thing. Like if you give certain emphasis to a particular word, any word that is stressed in English, it gets louder, it gets longer, and it gets higher in pitch usually, right? They kind of all go together in English. And so, but if you really emphasize a word, especially if there's certain emotion involved, like, did he really say that? Did he really say that? Like, if I go really high in pitch, it's like, wow, like I don't believe it. So it gives this feeling of like how is that possible, right? So there's other like maybe little things here and there. I need to go through and formalize all the stuff and see if I can nail down some simple patterns. I'm going to be making lessons on intonation in the near future, but it's in general, as I said, intonation is very very much and like even like this rising. Aside from certain things like say the comma, um, intonation is so very much dependent on what you're saying, why you're saying it, how you feel about it. Okay. And it can be very very messy. So I could say the same sentence, like 10 different ways, and there's slightly different implied, either like it feels a little different or there's like certain emotions in it, right? Like if I say, yeah, I like it, I like it, right? It's just very flat. It's like doesn't seem like I actually like it, right? So um anyway, so hang tight for the intonation lessons, and we'll see. But standard would be the comma. We usually go up. Of course, at a question, if it's a yes or no question, not a WH question, but if it's a yes or no question, we do also go up, but with a question tone. I call it the question curl because it sounds kind of like it curls, but That's a special thing. Um, okay, Lily, how is it like, or what is it like? Which one is right? Good question. Also, I've noticed that uptalk is also used when you're not so sure about something. Interesting observation. So the first thing, how is it like, or what is it like? Um, Here's a nice little tip, and I noticed that some natives actually sometimes will break this. Occasionally, it's not necessarily like a normal thing, but English learners make this mistake all the time. Like even advanced speakers, I still hear them making this mistake. Um, so here's the trick. Okay, what does not imply a way, right? Uh, like it doesn't imply the way something looks or the way something is done or whatever. It doesn't have the idea of a way. But if you combine what plus like, okay, like means similar. So what, like, what is it similar to? Okay. So if I say, there's a cloud and I see a cloud and I say, oh, look at that cloud. Do you see that cloud? And you say, what cloud? What does it look like? Okay. It's telling me I have an internet problem again. Um, so in sort of direct way, you're like, okay, way that something looks. What is the looking, right? Instead of whatever, it doesn't matter. Uh, like can go together to point towards the way something is, right? Or the way something is done. But how implies the way something is or the way something is done in the word how, right? That's what the word how is for. And so we don't combine like with how because it's already there. So we say, how is it? Okay. Um, Now these two they don't exactly mean the same thing. Depending on the context, you might be able to interchange them and it doesn't matter. But for example, let's say I'm eating some food, right? You make me a nice bowl of food and I taste it, I'm eating it, and you say, how is it? Okay, meaning like, do you like it? Is it good? Right? How is it? But if you say, what is it like? That question could still work. It seems a little bit weird here, but that sounds kind of like instead of asking is it good or not, you're asking me like is this food like is this food similar to something else that you've eaten before? Like does it taste like something you've eaten before? Right? So depending on the exact context of what we're talking about, they how could point to the way of something, what plus like can point to the way of something, but they might point to slightly different ways of something because as I said, what and like is similar to, which can contain the idea of a way, but it's not necessarily about a way, where how is like the way of something, right? It's like how to speak English, what is the way to speak English, right? How do you do it? So and it the main point here is don't use like with how. um, as I said, sometimes you will hear natives make this mistake. I think it's actually sort of backwards influence because now that we have all this mass media and we have even more exposure to like people with accents and who like aren't native speakers and this and that, I've noticed that there's a couple little things like this um, that and it always surprises me. I'm like, why? Like maybe they're Gen Zers. I'm not sure. So it maybe it's just like affecting the leading generation right now. Um, but I've occasionally heard some natives say like, "How is it like?" Um, and sometimes that might actually be because we get our wires crossed. Like we wanted to say, "What is it like?" and then "How is it like?" and they kind of like happen at the same time, and so we get "How is it like?" Sometimes that happens. um, but I have heard natives occasionally do that, and it's always strange to me. So I don't know. But what I would recommend, short, easy answer: never use like with how. Um, I never use like with how. Okay, at least off the top of my head. Maybe there's some other structure that it could be used with, but I would say never use it. And then uptalk used when you're not so sure about something. Probably. I mean, that sounds like it could be something. Um, Okay. I figure out what happened with the guy coming to fix the toilet seat. That's a big mix up. Anyway, uh, that's funny. So with the uptalk, possible. I don't necessarily know if it would be uptalk though. Like maybe in the speech of some speakers, yes, but as far as I can think like if based on like maybe the way I speak, maybe there could be some uptalk, but it could also just be sort of a lengthening. Um, like for example, right there, right? For example, instead of just saying, for example, blah blah blah. I said, for example, because I'm kind of thinking, so I'm not necessarily like going up with the pitch necessarily. I'm drawing it out. Maybe there's up with the pitch, kind of, but it's not like, for example, like that. That I would never say that. That's weird. So I don't know. Maybe could just be something I'm not really aware of. But either way, uptalk is not like if it's something you're curious about. I mean, there's nothing wrong learning about it, but I think uptalk is generally something that you can completely ignore. Like anybody here who is like, "What is he talking about with uptalk?" It doesn't matter. Just ignore it. um, so, Gabriel, I don't like when they use the verb be instead of simple tenses. For example, working a lot of people be crazy. Yeah, so that is that comes out of Ebonics, which, as I've said many times before, there's nothing wrong with Ebonics. It's perfectly valid. It's just not standard, and it will sound t- to a general American speaker's ears, it will sound uneducated, or at the very least informal. I was actually talking about this with a student yesterday, because he's up in New York right now visiting, and he's saying that he's actually hearing people speak like this, like some African Americans speak like this, and he's just like, it's so weird. I'm like, yeah, no, it's actually, it's. I think it's really interesting. It's like part of the grammar within Ebonics, and it's acquired the same way that like she is acquired for non-Ebonics speakers. But also because someone who grows up with the Ebonics speech, like they're also exposed to, they go to school, they hear people not using that form of speech usually, and so they'll acquire both. So they actually have like two different grammar sets for American English in the same brain, and it's really interesting. It's really, really interesting to me. But um, yeah, I wouldn't recommend that you use that. Like you can if you want. If you want to have that sound, you want to speak that way, and you don't care how people perceive it. There's nothing wrong with that. Um, but it will sound wrong to most American speakers. So I always have uh, problems with. I notice S's on the end, Sabrina. That seems to be a little bit of an issue. Putting S's at the end of words where we need them. I'm starting to notice a bit of a pattern, so that's something you might want to pay attention to try to improve. But I always have problems. You would maybe say a problem here, that's fine, but problems with the pronunciation of dark L. I think it is my worst problem. Just no S there. Don't make that mistake because it's worst problem, the worst problem, right? For the American pronunciation, example, well, I don't pronounce like the American people do. Okay. Yeah, that's the dark L. So I call the dark L the half L vowel, because it's basically a vowel. It's not 100% a vowel, but in many ways it is a vowel. It's more like a vowel than a consonant. Uh, so the half L, which you probably already know if you've been following the channel for a while. Half L vowel. Um, and this is a common problem for many English learners that are trying to get this. The short, easy thing, you won't sound 100% natural. But the short, easy thing is to just not even worry about the dark L and just always do like that full L, the light L sound where you always make contact. That will make it maybe a little harder to speak in some combinations, like depending on what's after it. But that's like the shortcut, lazy, easy thing that you could do if you don't care about sounding 100% natural and you just want to speak a little more easily and still be understood, you could just never do the dark L or the half L vowel, right? That's up to you. But if you do want to get that sound, right, if it is important to you, like it would be to me, then you have to be able to do that dark L or the half L by itself. Okay, if you can't do it by itself, then you're not going to be able to use it in the L colored combinations with E and E and O and all that stuff. So you have to be able to do O, 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 and that can take a lot of work because there's a particular shape to it. I have a lesson for that, which I assume you've seen. If you haven't seen it, look up that lesson. It's called like the half L vowel sound. And that's the hardest part. But if you can get that sound, that dark L sound, by itself, then number one, you can start using it in some words like, say, people, or even, right, I posted a lesson about this earlier, where you don't have to use the L colored schwa, which is the schwa plus dark L, right? So instead of saying O, you can just say O. It doesn't matter, just do that half L. Or if it's the horseshoe, like book, which I call the high schwa, plus L, you can just do that half L sound, the dark L. So people, pull, mull, null. Gavin was asking about some of these earlier. Hulk, right? Skull. It doesn't matter. So that's the first step that you can do to try to, instead of just doing the sound, you can put it into words like this. That way you can actually get used to like having sounds before it. So that would be like an intermediary step. So you're actually practicing that sound in some words. And then what you do is you say, okay, well, there's these L colored sounds, like the E plus O in well. And you gotta make sure that you do E, at least good enough. And then you gotta make sure that you do O at least good enough. And then you have to transition between them. And some transitions will be more difficult than others, like A plus O might be harder for you than E plus O. But you gotta blend them together. L, L, well, well, okay? And that's all it is. Break it down, very scientific, step by step. Got this piece, put them together, okay? But if you don't have the pieces, it's not gonna work, not gonna work. Sometimes strange things will happen where you could put them together, but individually you can't say them. There's all kinds of weird things that happen with the brain, but generally, if you don't have the pieces, you can't put them together. So David, if you saw these non-English words and had to say them for some random reason, let's see. Now you're testing just to see how, like, I wonder what natives would do here, right? What would be your gut reaction in terms of pronunciation? Okay, so the first one, the first thing that pops into my brain immediately is Rolik, Rolik. So O and then I for that second vowel sound. But almost immediately, like within microseconds of that popping in my head, Rollick pops into my head with ah instead. But the second one is still I, the like it. So Rollick or Rollick. The second one, first impression, Huska, so with an O, or Huska with an U. Possibly even Huska with a high schwa, but probably not. Notice, of course, I'm just doing a schwa for that A at the end. Could even be Huska, Huska, or something like that. I don't know, but that's like almost guaranteed it's going to be a schwa. So yeah, Huska, Hoska, one of those. Interestingly, yeah, now that I think about Hauska, I didn't even think about house, which is very interesting. It took me a second there, but yeah, Hauska, Hauska. That's another possible one, but that didn't come to my brain right away. Yeah. See, so this is a good example. Good questions for everybody to sort of get what I'm talking about there. Like, we wouldn't know how to pronounce it. And we usually have more than one possibility of how we might try to pronounce it because English is crazy. So at least the spelling of English is crazy. Well, even the internet connection can't handle all the English hacks being spilled today. Yeah, I know, right? Although instead of spilled works here. That's okay. I would probably say dropped. All the English hacks being dropped today. Right? 'Cause it's like dropping bombs in the sense of like I don't know. I don't even know, like mic drop. You know, like oh wow, point. Yeah. Anyway, not real bombs, of course. Sylvia, welcome to the chat again. Hope you're well. What about how do you like it? Okay, good question. Okay, so this is a case where how and like can be used together. Very good question. As I said before, like there might be some structure or something that wasn't coming to my brain. Um, but yes, in this case, it sounds like because we could just say, "Do you like it?" Right? It's yes or no. Um, when we say, "How do you like it?" This is actually a slightly different use of how than the normal use, and it makes it sound more. I don't necessarily formal, but it does sound kind of more formal and more polite. Like, how do you like it? You know, you're asking the same question. If you just say, "Do you like it?" It's a simple yes or no. But the point there, like say again, you give me some food, I taste it. If you just say, "Do you like it?" Yes or no, the implied information is it good or is it bad, right? Where if you say, "How do you like it?" Um, that has nothing to do with a way that you're liking it. It's a different use of how, sounds more polite, and it means exactly the same thing, except instead of the answer being yes or no, the answer would be it's good or it's bad, which is essentially the same. It changes the exact words that we would use because with the WH question word, the answer isn't yes or no. But now that we have a WH question word with how, uh, the answer is not going to be yes or no. It's going to be the good or bad, right? So good question, very good question. But that's a special use of how. Um, the smoke criminal. Interesting name. Not sure what to make of that. The smoke criminal. Okay. Anyway, an ESL teacher told me the North American L's are mostly dark L's. Should I stop using my light L's or keep on using the light L sound? Fantastic question. Fantastic question. Okay, so this teacher is, to put it simply, correct, but it's not so black and white. Okay. Here's the thing. See, this is what a lot of teachers do, which I think I get why, because they're trying to make it simple for you. I try to make things simpler for you as well with hacks and stuff, but I also try to tell you like there's like variation, there's different things, there's not just one right answer usually. And this is not a dialectical thing, this is not a variation. Like in general, there's usually more than one option of how to say a particular thing. Like say two linking rules can apply at the same time, and maybe we apply one instead of the other, and it both work just fine. It doesn't matter. So here, um, I have a lesson on. As I was talking about earlier, the dark L, I don't use that term. Okay, because dark L and light L, they don't mean anything to me. Like I can, if I say la, the light L, I can think of why I might call that light, and I can also think of why I might call that dark. So it doesn't make any sense to me. So I use different terms. I use half L vowel, or just half L for short, because you're not bringing the tongue up, so it's like half of the sound. Um, and it's not exactly a vowel, but with the way that it's made in the mouth and the way that it generally acts in the language with like linking and stuff, um, or the way that it can work in linking, it functions mostly like a vowel most of the time. So I call it a vowel sound, and because it really functions that way. Then the light L, I call the full L, which is a consonant, full L consonant. Um, that's the normal L, right? Now, I have a lesson on the half L, and right after that, I have a lesson on the full L. And then I have a lesson, which I think is after that one in the playlist for the course, the American English pronunciation course. I have a lesson called the half L hack. Okay, so if you haven't watched those, especially the half L hack, you're going to want to watch those. But the short, simple thing here is that Americans, we never, it's actually never required to use the full L, right? Now, according to the rules, it is. If you have an L, which you probably know the rule, right? If you have an L at the start of a syllable, then it's a full L. It's a light L, especially at the start of a word. But Americans break that rule all the time. Okay, all the time. Now, there's also a bit of a range, and I'm going to be making a whole set of lessons talking about the range of sounds. Which, if you're not familiar with me talking about that, don't worry too much about it right now. But this full L, half L, or light L, dark L, it's actually part of a range of one sound, the L sound. And the thing about the ranges is that as you get, like, this is like the full perfect sound, right? That's like a perfect clear L. Um, as you get farther away from slower, clearly enunciated speech, and you speak lazier and or faster, we tend to get standard variations of how the exact way that we might pronounce certain sounds or whatever. And it sounds a lot more complicated than it is. Don't worry too much about it right now. But I mention this because if, say, you have an L at the start of a syllable, especially if it's at the start of a word, the first word in the sentence, like, I don't know, if I say, um, last week we went to the park, right? Very likely, especially if you're emphasizing or you're saying L, okay? But in the flow of speech, generally overall, what most Americans do most of the time, if we don't have any sort of special emphasis on a word as L in the middle or at the start of a syllable, we'll just constantly keep doing that half L or that dark L. So instead of saying last week of the park, I could say last week, I see. It's hard. I'm not saying last, last, last week. Okay. Uh, totally possible. 100% possible. So that's kind of your choice. As I said, if you are enunciating, if you're emphasizing for some way, if you're speaking more slowly than usual, then the places where where you're supposed to use the light L, right, or what I call the full L, you should probably use them because we will use them in those cases. But in the general flow of speech, if you can do a good dark L and you can make it clear, even at the start of syllables and stuff, then you can just use that like 90% of the time. Yeah. So I wouldn't stop using them, but kind of you can more or less stop using the light L, right? Um, anyway, so but yeah, definitely go watch this lesson, especially the half L hack. That'll tell you pretty much everything you need. Lily, I have a friend that speaks Ebonics, and I find, well, either it, meaning the way they speak, or find him or her, as in like a person speaking that way, so charming. We need something there. It sounds like he's rapping while he speaks. Uh, okay. Yeah. See, and again, that's probably which I don't know the kind of music you listen to, Lily, but the a lot of which this is a very broad generalization, maybe even a stereotype. A lot of speakers who are in rap and hip hop and R&B, um, they have that Ebonics background, right? Uh, and so that way of speaking is very common in that type of music. And so if you listen to that type of music, which I know especially hip hop is like very popular around the world, um, and then you hear somebody, using that type of speech when they're not, singing, they're just speaking. You might get this impression like this. It sounds like he's rapping while he speaks. So yeah, I find the way Ebonic sounds to be very interesting. To me, it doesn't sound like somebody's rapping while they speak, but uh, I understand where that's sort of coming from. But yeah, it's interesting. Um, and let's see here. Could you give some tips on saying interpreted fast? Possibly break it down into the individual syllables. Um, I always trip over it when I use the word interpreter as well. Well, interpreter is going to be a little bit easier. So interpreter, 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 interpreter. So so that T is an actual T because it's the start of a stress syllable, right? We can't apply the NT plus vowel rule here because that T has to be there. Because remember, sometimes we can apply NT plus vowel where we drop the T inside of words. Usually it's between words. This is a case where we can't. So interpreter, inter, and then interpreter, interpreter. So we're gonna go but it doesn't have to actually like it could be like a real like schwa schwa where it's like kind of there's almost nothing there instead of like right? If we're speaking quickly, we're not going to go like interpreter, right? That's not quite right. So you want to get it really super small, like you're kind of just doing like PR, super short and fast, and that's it. Like there's actually not really anything in there. You could bring a little bit of an I into it instead, interpret, right? Interpret, and that's fine, but it's still super, super small, super, super short. And then that last T is going to be a flat D because it's between two vowels at the start of an unstressed syllable. So interpreter, 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 interpreter. And I know that could be really hard to do in your mouth, but that's how you would do it. For interpreted, that's going to be a little bit different because of the ending. So the first part is the same. Interpret, right? Interpreted. So interpreter, interpreted. So everything is the same up to the per part. We're still going to flap the D at the end there. But now instead of going to after that flap D, we're going to go into either it or it doesn't matter which one. And then go into what will probably be a stopped D at the very end. Interpreted, 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 interpreter, interpreter, interpreted, interpreted. So interpreter is probably the harder of the two because you have to not only do you have per before the flap D, but then you also have the flap D going into which is a very difficult combination by itself. But the other one is actually I think probably a little easier because you get to flap into just like it or and then go back into a stop D. So it's just like a regular flap. I'm pretty sure it's because of having. So I mean tips because I know you're asking specifically for tips. Those are my tips. Just break it down, right? Anytime that you're having trouble with a particular combination of sounds or a particular word, you break it down into its pieces. And you can even micro shadow where like, you have somebody saying that word and you just repeat, like, especially if you put it on in Audacity and you highlight, say the like that's say the difficult part, right? And you just highlight that part, you could just play it over and over and over and over and over and like repeat it and make little tiny adjustments to get lots of volume for it. And that's what you do, right? You just listen and repeat a lot to a particular combination or particular word that you're having trouble with, and making little changes along the way until you start to say it a bit better, right? So again, make sure that you can say the pieces well, because if you can't say the pieces well, you're gonna have a problem. So and then put it back together. I'm pretty sure it's of having to go from the R sound to the PR cluster and right into the flap. Exactly. Yeah. That's what I would diagnose the problem as. Space in X gaming. X gaming. Hillary from Brazil. Okay. Muito bom. I don't really speak Portuguese. I just know a little bit. Pero sí hablo español. So, sí, soy gringo, pero creo que no sueno como gringo. um, yes, anybody here who is not from Brazil or a Spanish-speaking country and doesn't know what gringo means, it means white person. So yes, I'm a white person. That is very true. It's a little rude, though. I will say. I personally don't care, but yeah, if you go up to somebody and say, "Hey, gringo," like probably people are going to find that rude, just for reference. But yeah, another person from Brazil. So we have what now, like 10 people from Brazil? I don't even know. But yes, welcome to the chat. Would you say there's a difference in the way you pronounce in a stress position, such as in the middle of interpreter, versus at the end of interpreter? Okay, good question. Good question. Yeah, so there's lots of R's in this word. There's 2 R vowels and 1 R consonant. Is there a difference? Interpreter. No. No difference at all. The vowel is the vowel, right? Obviously, there's our colored vowels like R and air and whatever. But if it's the vowel, just that's what it is. Okay, there's no effect from other things. Anything that might sound a little bit different would be from like where you're coming from. So in the case of going flap D to that can sound a little bit different because of the fact that we have to flap the D, tap it, and pull it back. And so you might get like the sound itself is still the same. We're still doing the exact same but going into the sound might sound a little bit different, and that might make it seem like maybe the sound is a little different, but it's the same end point. We don't do anything different there. It's just the stress changes. So in this particular case, right, it's unstressed versus stressed, and is most commonly used unstressed, the vowel. It's even used for some reductions, like for to fur, FOR. But it can also be used stressed, and if it's stressed, it's just relatively louder and longer, just like any stressed syllable would be. That's all. So, and if there are speakers who do make a difference, number one, I don't make a difference, and I speak one of the neutral pronunciations of American English, or one of the neutral accents, I guess I should say. And so you definitely don't have to make a difference there. Even if you go technically, I think based off the IPA, there's like 2 different symbols for like the vowel and the consonant, and the vowel of the vowel and the consonant. The only real difference, again, maybe some speakers say them a little bit differently, but that always confused me because I say them exactly the same. It's just that the consonant is relative to the vowel, not based on stress, but relative to the vowel is super, super short. So we say run. We don't say run, right? That would be the vowel. That's really the only difference between them. They're made, it's the exact same sound. So thank you for your responses. Also, how should I go about acquiring General American accent? So either the or a General American accent. What should be my routine, and how much time should I be dedicating to working on my pronunciation daily? What should my routine be? What did you say? What should be my routine? What should be my routine? I actually think that works. What should be my routine? But yeah, what should my routine be? That sounds a lot better. What should be my routine? Actually, it doesn't sound too bad, but your correction would definitely be the standard there. So good job. And then response. So you change responses to response. Thank you for your responses. Well, yes. I mean, I guess I only answered one question of yours before. Yes, so that would be response. So, but see, when I read the plural, I was just thinking like, okay, in general, like because I'm responding to other people, so it still works technically. Okay, how to go about acquiring General American accent? Well, that's kind of what my entire pronunciation course is about. So it's long. There's currently over 100 lessons in the course, and it's free here on YouTube. So it's a lot of information, but that's the first place I would start. Go through that course. Um, and don't try to rush through it, right? Take your time. My whole goal with pronunciation on this channel, because obviously I've talked mostly about pronunciation up till this point, and I'm trying to finish the pronunciation course so I can talk about some other stuff. I'll still be talking about pronunciation, but not things that go in the main course. But what was I going to say? I completely lost my thought there. Yeah, that just completely disappeared. That's fun. Oh yeah, my whole purpose with my pronunciation lessons on this channel is to make you need someone like me as little as possible, right? Because most people do this to, like, get more clients or this or that, whatever. I want you to not be my client. I want you to be able to get as much as you possibly can without any actual paid professional help. And then, of course, yes, you do need some feedback, which you can just get from any native. So you can find a language exchange partner or a tutor, a cheap tutor on italki, and they can tell you how you sound. And if you use the techniques that I tell you in the course, which I still need to make more technique videos, but if you use the techniques and stuff that I tell you about in the course, then you can take the feedback that any native speaker gives you and know how to adjust and improve your pronunciation based on what they tell you with how you sound. Because you may not be able to tell exactly how you sound. That's part of the problem. So you need somebody else's ear to be able to tell you. Unless you have a bit of a talent, in which case you can probably start to kind of hear it yourself. But even then, it could be, you can't completely trust your own ears until you train them better. So that's why I give you the minimal pairs and stuff to help you able to hear what's going on. But anyway, some feedback is going to be very, very useful. But if you go through that course, it's not done yet. But there's that course which will give you everything you need to know about all the sounds and the stress. And I have some rhythm lessons. I'm going to be making some intonation lessons and some other stuff. It's also going to tell you about some other things, like I was mentioning with, like, the L sounds that you may never even hear from other teachers, or most other teachers. I don't know. Then there's certain techniques which you're going to find in the course, like shadowing. And that's a whole little topic by itself, because I need to make an actual, like, dedicated long video to, like, how to do shadowing and different ways that you can do it, because there's not just one way. But there's a way that I recommend to do it, and I've talked about that before in the live streams. So there's lots of things you can do, but you want to train your ears, use the minimal pairs, right? Go through the course to learn what all the sounds are and how to, like, use your mouth. Work on especially the vowel sounds, right? Trying to master the basic vowel sounds. And if you want to sound exactly like a native or close to a native, then you have to put in a little extra work for those sounds that are going to be a little difficult, because some are going to be harder than others. But you just go through, you work on the vowels. Vowels give you the biggest benefit because it causes most of the problems. And you just go step by step, right? Like, don't try to master all the vowels at once, right? Find the ones that you have the most problems with. Pick one or two of them to sort of, like, make sure you're playing with them throughout the day. You're using micro adjustments, which is little tiny changes in your tongue, trying to make it sound a little bit better. Like, okay, if I do this, does it sound better? If I do that, does it sound better? Again, I'm going to have a longer form lesson for that in the near future. But shadowing, micro adjustments, minimal pairs for ear training, learning what the sounds are, how to use your mouth. And once you I look at this as phases, right? Because you have to be able to produce the sound. Once you can produce the sounds, you start putting the sounds together, right? It's like, literally, if we go, I have my upside down map that maps all skills, but if you look at language, spoken language is based on sound. That's the core fundamental unit, and then that combines into, like, you start putting sounds together, and you get syllables, and then you get words, and then you get or phrases and sentences, and then you get paragraphs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so at that very basic fundamental level, right? You're getting, okay, this sound is good, this sound is good. Let's put it together. Now we have, a word. Some words are just one sound, one syllable, like a, right? Which is usually pronounced so it's easy. But if you say want, okay, now you have w, a, n, t, and then the t might be stopped, it might be dropped. That's all linking rules depending on what's after it, all these different things that could happen. That's a different part of it. But for the sounds themselves, right, you're starting to put sounds together, and you might find, as I mentioned earlier, uh, for some examples, that you might find that some combinations of sounds, like say W plus ah, maybe is difficult for you. Maybe you can do ah, maybe you can do w, wah, and it doesn't come right. And so you got to go in again and say, okay, transition sound, something isn't right. So let me try to make a little, see if it sounds better. So also building up own mouth feels, especially your tongue, right? Some vowels are on the front of the tongue, some are in the middle, some are in the back. I have the vowel chart that's at the beginning of the course that you can see sort of what's going on with your tongue. It doesn't tell you the tense and the shape, but it tells you where they should be placed. In the mouth, they should be like ah or e, et cetera, et cetera. So being aware of how your tongue feels over time, that helps. Also, being aware of your own language, like trying to become a little conscious of um, what your tongue is doing that might be kind of similar. So say if you have what's a good example, say, so a lot of languages have like an a sound that's like ah, right, and English doesn't quite have that sound. So we have ah and we have ah. So you can take your ah, if that's the sound in your language, and okay, so I know if you're trying to find ah, that's actually in the back of the tongue based on the vowel chart. And so your ah is probably more in the front, so you have to lower the back of your tongue. So you have a reference point in your own language. You're just not conscious of how your tongue feels. And so becoming aware of how your own language feels will also help you a lot with mastering the pronunciation in English, because you already have reference points that you're just not consciously aware of in your native language. There's all kinds of little tips like that and stuff. In fact, actually one, which I have not mentioned on the channel yet, I'm going to reveal it here. Yes. Okay. Are you ready? This is a new technique that I came up with, I think like maybe 3 weeks ago now. And I've been testing it with some people. And so far, the results are very positive, very, very positive. In fact, one person said that the technique is OP, which, if you don't know what that means, it means it's overpowered. It's like amazingly powerful. Okay. It's what I am currently calling the self accent hack. I'm not sure if I should call it the self accent hack or the reverse accent hack. They both sound really good to me, but for now, I'll just call it the self accent hack. And what this is basically you want to get recordings of yourself, right? And you want to be talking normally. You're not trying to sit there and try to say something. You want like maybe a prompt where, like, say you find a question to answer or something, or if you're talking to somebody, for say a teacher or a language exchange partner, you can record the conversation and then cut out the other person, and which you can do that in Audacity. You don't have to do that, but it's better. And then you want to acquire, say, I don't know, at least 10 to 20 minutes of you speaking. It could be multiple clips that you put together. That's fine. But you want to gather 10 to 20 minutes of you speaking, if not more. And then you want to just constantly listen to yourself. Okay. And at first you might think like, what is this? Why would I do that? I sound horrible. I don't want to hear myself. I just want to be able to say things, better in English. But the theory, which, as I said, I'm getting really good results. So it's not just theory, but the theory, when I first thought of the idea, was okay, so we know that in language learning, whether it's for grammar or pronunciation or even vocabulary usage, right, you get lots and lots of input. And just like you did with your native language, acquiring your native language, it's a little bit of a different process, but Very similarly to that, you started to get used to, you know, what sounds right, what goes together, how to do this, how to do that. And for English, right, even if maybe you still have to train your ears a little bit and there's some sounds you're not hearing, you have a lot of exposure to English at this point, right? Or at least I assume you do if you're at least, say, upper beginner to lower intermediate. You still need to get as much input as possible, especially listening. Reading also helps, but especially listening. Get as much as you possibly can without subtitles. Um, and because of that, even if you're not completely hearing everything perfectly, you do have a good reference. You kind of know how it sounds, right? Especially compared to your language, this sounds different, right? But what you don't have in your brain is how you sound. And so you don't have like a repository or a built-in reference for that. Um, because number one, you probably don't want to hear yourself. And number two, you're trying to match this over here, right? But if you actually listen to yourself, you have this recording, you're playing it. Okay, it doesn't have to be all day, every day, but you want to regularly, every day, just kind of be listening to it. And you're not analyzing it. Okay, you're not analyzing the recording of yourself. You're not saying, oh, that's wrong, or that's, you're going to notice some things. That's okay. But it's just generally listening, just having your own accent, your own pronunciation go, right? And you don't want to completely zone out where you're not paying attention to it at all. But like say if you're doing the dishes and you're listening to how you sound. Okay, yeah. And if you do that enough, what's going to happen is you're going to start building that repository. And that is going to give you a better reference for how to fix it. Okay. Because now you're going to be more aware of, oh, when I try to do the sound, I tend to do this. Or, oh, when I try to do this, it comes out that way. And there's some things that you might already know about, but there's lots of things that maybe you think you're pronouncing well that you're not. That's a very common thing. And so recording yourself just in general, even without doing this particular self accent hack, is a really useful tool because you'd be surprised at how off your pronunciation is when you think you're doing a good job. Um, but if you try using the self accent hack, I think that's also going to help as well because I've had I think 4 or 5 people that I've tried this with so far. Two of them were kind of lazy with it. And they're like, yeah, I kind of try to do it here and there. I'm really busy. I do it, sometimes maybe once every other day or something. And they're not really seeing a whole lot of benefit. They're like, yeah, kind of, sort of. But the people who are like doing it regularly every day and they're like, making it part of their routine, um, it's actually helping their brain to adjust to English better, the English pronunciation. So it works. So far with the people that have used it consistently as part of a routine, it works. Okay, um, so that's something that you can play with. Maybe it won't work for everybody. I don't know, but yeah. And then as for a routine, the biggest thing about a routine is be consistent. I mentioned the shadowing. I mentioned this and that. Be consistent is the number one biggest thing. Exactly what you do is going to kind of vary, right? Different people do slightly different things. Um, and I would also adopt an 80-20 approach, which includes pronunciation in general, the stress, the rhythm, the sounds, everything, but also especially for the sounds. That's why I say focus on the vowels first primarily, because those usually cause most of the problems. But even within the vowels, right, you might have, say, 6 vowels that need some work, but 2 of them are really big problems, right? Or whatever it is. And so you want to focus on like those 2 first, right? Um, so if you take an 80-20 approach, you're always making the biggest amount of progress possible. And then once that's solved, you go to the next one and the next one and the next one. Um, and that way you can improve the fastest. But anyway, that would be the advice that I would float your way for now. um, it's not something that's like so super simple and easy to answer because it depends on a lot of things. But yeah. David, so for, what are we at? We're at 148. For chimera, the mythological creature, which of these sounds better to your ears? Chimera or chimera? Neither of them. I would say chimera. Um, So I would actually use air, not ear. It's a chimera. Yeah, I wouldn't reduce chi to k. Um, I'm sure that I've heard people say like chimera or chimera. Uh, it sounds a little bit weird to me, but I think there may be other speakers who say it that way. So it's fine, I assume, but I just don't say it either way. I say chimera. What syllable do you stress in the not so common word? Yeah, that's a good question. Disparate. I worry that if I stress the first one, it gets really close to sounding like desperate. Um, no, because there's a completely different sound there. So if your pronunciation of the vowel sounds aren't separate enough, then yes, it will, whether it's stressed or not, then it will sound similar. But if your pronunciation of the vowel sounds are good, then it doesn't matter, especially if it's stressed. If it's stressed, we're going to hear the difference even more between them. So I wouldn't worry about that at all. But yeah, disparate, disparate. So it'd be on the first syllable. In the word with an E, that would be desperate. So also notice it's not disparate, it's disparate. Disparate. At least that's how I say it. Where with desperate, you could say desperate with an extra syllable there, but this is one of those words where instead of using the vowel, we'll actually change it to the consonant and drop that syllable. I have a lesson on that with some examples, but yeah, desperate, desperate. Great. I can't wait for an in-depth lesson on different ways of shadowing. Good. For now, my mantra is don't just practice until you get it right. Practice until you can't get it wrong. Pretty hard. Well, that's actually pretty good. Yeah. Like if you want to develop, if you want to sound like a native, right? If you don't want to sound like a native, then that's a bit too hardcore. Yeah, you don't have to go that far. But if you do want to sound like a native, that's actually pretty much what you have to do, because you have to build the muscle memory, right? Um, so that's pretty accurate, I would say. Because getting it right, that's part of the process of learning is like for some sounds, you're gonna find the sound, like say right? Is a usually difficult sound. So you kind of play with it, and it's like, oh, finally, right, you're getting feedback. It's like, oh yeah, that sounds like a good that sounds perfect. You're like, all right, I found the and then whether you keep playing with it or not, you'll notice a few days later it disappears. Like, where'd my go? I can't do it right anymore. It's a natural part of the process, right? And then you practice it, keep practicing it, and it comes back, and you're like, okay, yeah, I found it again, right? And it might even go away one more time. Things can happen, but um, now that you have it, right? Once you can do it consistently 80% of the time, that's the first goal. You want to be able to do a sound 80% of the time consistently, right? On command, not in the flow of speech, but when you consciously focus on it, 8 out of 10 times, can you say it the way that it should be perfectly? Okay, that particular sound. Um, if you can, that's the minimum, right? That's going to be enough to where you really start having that muscle memory. It's just that obviously because you have interference from your other language, that's going to cover that little other 20%, and you can shrink that 20% to potentially zero. But that's when you need a little bit more training, a little bit more practice, and that will kind of come in time as you're using words, as you're trying to filter it into your speech and this and that, whatever. But you need to get that minimum threshold first to build that muscle memory. Because if you don't have the muscle memory, then you're not going to get anywhere. You're just going to lose it, right? So it's absolutely true. Don't just practice till you get it right, because just because you get it right doesn't mean that it's always going to be right. Yeah, good point. But yeah, for the shadowing lesson, I've been putting that off because obviously it's a really important lesson, but I've been putting that off for like over half a year because I'm just like, I know I need to make this, but I really have no idea how to do it in like a simple, effective way that will apply to a general audience. Because usually when I talk about shadowing, say like I'm working with a student and then I tell them about shadowing, and I work with them to find, like the way that works best for them. So I give them my general advice of like, doing 3 passes over one sentence with the sounds, the rhythm and stress, intonation, and the linking. Um, and they'll kind of try that. They'll play with it. Maybe it's a little too intense. Maybe this or that or whatever. And so it kind of depends on the person a little bit about like what's going to fit best with them, and I can do that when I'm working with a person. But if I try to make a lesson that's just general for any person, say here's how you shadow, aside from giving my general in-depth intensive shadowing advice, and still making it broadly applicable and short and to the point where I'm not just like talking rambling on like I have a tendency to do. um, it's something very, very difficult that I've been trying to figure out, like what's the best way to do that. So it will be coming. It's going to be part of the main course, but honestly, it's probably going to be like one of the last lessons I get to for the course. So it's a good thing I'm trying to finish the course up over this next 3 months or so. So it will be coming soon, but yeah, I'm going to put it off. When you're reading an article out loud, which I do have a basic video on shadowing, which I took from a TikTok. And if you haven't seen that, you can start there. But yeah, the full lesson will be coming. When you're reading an article out loud, or are you more likely to replace abbreviations like e.g. or i.e. with for example or that is, or do you literally sound out the letters? Good question. Well, I can tell you in my head, I pronounce the letters if I'm not reading out loud. I think it's a normal thing to actually say e.g., i.e., whatever. But yeah, saying like I think for example would be more common and more normal. Instead of that is, I actually when I say i.e., I think I tend to say like. Probably like a wrong use of like, or even with eg, I might say like, because we abuse the word like, but yeah, I don't think it really matters. Either way is fine. By the way, what does humble brag mean? Is it the same as flexing? Yeah, all these terms. No, so they're not opposites, but in a way they're kind of opposites. At least my impression of these. Flexing, right? Like flex. So if right now, right, I'm on the camera, I'm like, oh, look at that. This is so great. Yeah, I got all this muscle. Like I'm showing off. That's what we say. I'm trying to impress, like, oh, I'm so cool, right? So I think this is actually came out of Gen Z. We've started to use flex um, in a more broad abstract way where you're not literally flexing, but you're doing something with the same intention as if I were trying to show off my muscles. So like, oh, I can do this thing like so good and so awesome that I'm just like, there you go, see, aren't I so great? And you might not say that, but like the way that you do it, like it's clear that you're trying to show off and be cool. You're flexing, right? So there's nothing humble about that. You're basically saying, look at me, I'm awesome. Where humble, humility, is the opposite of that. But if you're bragging, obviously bragging is it's not the same as flexing, but it's in that same area. Like you're still saying like, oh yeah, I'm so cool, right? Oh, this is so great. This is so awesome because I did it and I'm so great. Um, Flexing is kind of more like the act, where brag is like more like you're talking about it. So a humble brag would kind of be like where you're not trying to brag, like you're not trying to say, "Oh yeah, I'm so cool because I can do this thing," but um, like maybe you can do something really well. Like for me, for example, um, I do have a talent for language and for pronunciation, and so I could tell you like, "Oh yeah." I could probably learn the pronunciation of a random language, twice as fast as the average person or something, like, if, which I don't know if that's true, but let's say I have, like, I've done that and I'm really good with it, and I tell you that, and you're like, wow, it sounds like you're bragging, like you're so cool, like, whatever. But if I'm saying that with the intention of you thinking that I'm cool, then I'm bragging. But if I say that to illustrate a point about something else, like, it doesn't particularly, I'm not trying to make myself look good. I'm just saying, like, yeah, I do have this ability. But, like, for example, if I say, oh yeah, I can learn pronunciation 2 times as fast as the average person, but the average person can still reach, the same level that I can. It's just, twice as long, So that, it sounds like I'm bragging because it's like, oh, I'm saying this really good thing about myself, but I'm actually not saying it to look cool. I'm saying it because I'm not trying to brag. It's just I'm using it to, illustrate something else. That's my understanding of it. Let me actually look it up here. Humble brag. Um, Ostensibly self-deprecating statement made to show off. Okay, so maybe not. Maybe my my understanding of it is completely wrong, or maybe there's more than one meaning. Okay, so let's see. Definition of humble brag: to make a seemingly modest, self-critical, casual statement or reference that is meant to draw attention to one's admirable qualities or achievements. That's a good dictionary. Okay, so this is actually something that I've looked up. I've sort of seen it used sometimes, and I'm not super familiar with the term. And so my impression of it that I just explained to you is actually not right. That's why I like to look things up sometimes. So I think that the way that I was explaining it, it could be used that way. But meant to draw attention. So apparently a humble brag is it's like you are bragging, but you're trying to make it seem like you're not bragging. um, yeah, so if you mention that, like, oh yeah, I read, you know, 10 books this month. And you just say it casually. You're like, oh, yeah, well, yeah, I read 10 books this month, and yeah, they were pretty interesting. Like, you're not trying to say, like, oh, hey, guess what? I read 10 books. That's awesome, right? Like, oh, you can't do that, right? I don't know. But the point here is that flexing is different, because that was the question, right? It's not the same as flexing, because in flexing, there's no humility to it. As I said, there's no humble part. Although I guess you could be flexing and try to make it subtle in a way. Like, as I said, flexing to me seems more like the action. Like, you're not necessarily talking about, like, you're actually doing it. So, like, maybe you could do it in a way that it's like, oh yeah, like, it still seems cool, but it doesn't seem like, some big thing. It's just like, oh yeah, that was easy. You could still be flexing. But Wender, haven't heard from you in a while. Good to see you. Is the preposition on reduced in the middle of words, right? In the middle of, I guess, sentences, or is it pronounced in lot? What? Okay, I think I understand the question. Maybe. Okay, so the pronunciation of the preposition on. It's ah, ah, ah. Now I have the cot merger, which is what I teach you guys. Still sounds neutral. Still sounds natural. So I'm going to say it back here. Ah, ah, ah. People who don't have the merger, they probably say like ah, which I think is probably with the letter you're trying to write there in the brackets or the slashes. Um, I don't know which one it's supposed to be, if it's ah or ah, but for me it's merged, so it's ah, like in lot. Yes. Um, can it be reduced? Okay. Can it be reduced? Yes, but not always. I actually talked about this. I think it was last week. If it wasn't, it was like 2 weeks ago. Um, in Okay, you have to be careful because in is the I sound, and that can actually also be reduced. In fact, it could just be reduced to n sometimes if you're in the flow of fast speech. So if I say, like, it's in the box, It's in the box. It's in the box. We're going to interpret that as in the box. Now, something could be on a box. Okay. If I want to say it's on the box and I say it's in the box, nobody is going to interpret that as on. They're going to interpret that as in. Okay. Um, so if there are cases where in or on could be used, then you cannot reduce on. Unless the context is somehow really, really clear of which one it is. But usually, if you try to reduce it and in is possible, then we're going to interpret it as in. But let's say maybe on the table, because usually we don't put things in a table. Like a table might have a drawer, and you could say it's in the table, but usually it's going to be on, right? So it's pretty clear it should probably be on. So if you say it's in the table, it's in the table, it's in the table. Now there might be a little bit of in there, not just a straight in. In that case, you can still reduce it, and it would be clear because in doesn't really work. Technically, it's possible if there's a drawer, but usually that's not the case, right? Um, so that's what you have to be careful of. It can possibly be reduced, but it's a special case. And the short easy thing is just I would just not reduce it. Just say because it's not stressed usually. If it's part of a phrasal verb, it can be stressed, but on by itself is just not stressed. So just instead of saying on, nice and clear, just say on. On. You're still back here. It's just really short, really quiet. Maybe not open quite as much. On. It's on the table. It's on. It's on. It's on the table. Easy. Okay. Um, Bonus lightning round. Okay. Let's see. Oh, the great debate. The greatest debate of the internet. Yeah, how do we pronounce that word? I'll come back to that. The second one, I'm going to save that one for last. The second one, I have never heard anybody say that as mauve. That I would be very surprised to hear anybody say it that way. It's mauve. Um, yeah, prelude or prelude both sound okay to me. I would probably use prelude. Um, Four options for the last one. Yeah. Solder, solder, solder. So solder is definitely in my brain the default. Um, just ah. Solder sounds weird to me. Solder with the L color O would be a variation that sounds perfectly fine. Solder seems a bit weird. So I would say two of the three, with solder being the number one by far. Now, as for that first word, I always used to say it as, because it's a G, or it's the letter G, right? This is the thing, right? This is why this is a debate. Like, this is actually debated online. Like, people say it's pronounced GIF. No, it's GIF. Because the letter G in English can represent, it's GIF as a abbreviation. What is it? Graphics. I don't even know what it stands for, but it's the file format. Um, and then you just to a random native speaker. We don't know what it's supposed to be. Right? It says, like, that's how they intended it, then technically that's how it should be pronounced. But I use both. I really don't know. It's one of those words where it's like, it feels uncomfortable either way. It's like you don't really know. It's like if I say GIF, it's like, it feels weird. If it feels weird, oh, it doesn't matter. That's my answer to the internet. Can you not get to my comment in the last loud before this came answer? Give me examples, thank you. Which examples where? For what? This is so random. I don't know if you left, if there's another thing here that didn't go through. If you're referring to something from the last live, I don't remember what the comment was or what we're talking about, so you'll have to specify what that is. Why are dictionary definitions geared towards native speakers always so convoluted and describe something easy with a bunch of super vague advanced words? I know, right? Well, that's probably because number one, I mean, everyday words are everyday words for a reason. Like they're usually simpler, they're shorter, they're not fancy or anything. And so, like if I say car, okay, car, we all know what a car is, right? But how do you describe a car? Well, you're gonna have to bring in some other fancier words because car is self-describing, right? You can't define car with the word car. So you say, okay, vehicle, all right, that classifies it, and it has, I mean, windows, doors. That's not fancy, but combustion engine, whatever, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's just the nature of trying to describe what words mean. You need lots of other words to describe that one word because that one word contains that description in itself. Right? It's just implied. So, but yeah, that's true. Um, Elihu Drew. Yes, hello. Um, Sorry, it took me a second to get to you here. I'm always trying to go in order through the chat. But yes, welcome if you're still here. I hope you're still here. Feel free to ask questions. Always glad to have more people here. And I apologize if I said your name wrong. That's the best I know how to say it. But Nandon, I guess, something like that. Also, welcome to the chat. Do you agree that you still can sound like a native speaker even if you have a slight accent? I've noticed that people who grew up bilingual often have slight accents in both languages. Very interesting observation. Um, First, I'll say I have also noticed that maybe not all people that grew up bilingual, but I do know some people who grew up bilingual, and they, at least in English, for according to my ears, they don't have an accent. Like they sound perfectly fine. Um, but especially probably because I'm exposed to a lot of Spanish speakers around here, I have noticed quite a few bilingual speakers. I assume they grew up bilingual. Um, that when they speak English, they have a little bit of like, I wouldn't even call it a Spanish accent necessarily. It's almost like, I guess, like a little bit of like a Mexican accent. I don't even know how to describe it, but it sounds kind of Spanish in a way that like it doesn't seem like a normal Spanish accent. It's just like there's a little like literal accent, like a little sort of shift in like a coloring of how they speak that sounds like 99% the way that say I would. And it still sounds very native and very natural. It just doesn't sound 100% neutral, right? They have this little tiny like Spanish coloring that doesn't even sound like a Spanish accent. It's very hard to describe, but I think you get what I mean. Um, so that can happen, yes. But do I agree that you can still sound like a native even if you have a slight accent? Well, this would depend on how we define our terms, right? Because sometimes when people say like a native, they mean not 100%, but extremely close to where it's maybe kind of hard to tell, or we at least don't know where you're from. The way I use these terms, I would say like a native or native like would be like 99%, where it's um, like I can kind of maybe tell here and there. There's a couple things that are a little bit off that I'm not used to, but you pretty much sound like a native, right? Like it's like almost perfect. Where perfect like sound, have a native like a perfect pronunciation. That's sort of how I describe being perfect. You have perfect pronunciation or whatever. Um, so I assume you're asking more for like maybe if they have say they're like 95%, like they have enough of an accent to where we can tell that they're not a native, but not enough to know where they're from, right? Because that's a nice place to be. I would put that at like 95% or so. Um, if you're at that point, and we call that a slight accent, then no, you're not going to sound uh, like we're going to tell you're not a native. Obviously, we just won't know where you're from. Um, but if you get it up to like 98, 99%, you will sound pretty much like a native. And some people might not really notice, but it also depends on what sounds. Like if you don't have a good R sound, it's going to stand out in American English because we fully pronounce all of our R's, right? If you use the British R instead, it's going to sound British instead of American. Or if you can't do the half L right, the dark L, ol, right? Um, you got to do that if you want to sound like a native. Like it's not, you can't escape that. So if you can't do that, we're going to tell. Uh, but let's say maybe your ah sound or your I sound is just a little tiny bit off. It's not mixed with any other sound, like there's no interference. It's just eh. It's not quite 100%. It's like 99% of sounds. It may easily go unnoticed in the flow of normal fast speech, but as soon as you enunciate, you really like emphasize a word, maybe it comes out and it sounds a little bit clearer that it's not quite right. In which case we will be able to tell. So there's little degrees. It depends on the exact sounds we're talking about. But generally, like if you want to be able to fool a native, like you have to have mastery of like pretty much everything, right? So, but within that, also, I think looking at the bigger picture, because I have a lesson, which if you haven't seen it, talking about the fact that there's not just one neutral pronunciation um, in American English. American English is weird like this. Uh, so like I'm from the Western United States. I speak generally what would be called Western American English. But Western American English is considered under the umbrella of General American English, right? So people from the Northeast, not counting, certain accents and stuff, but like say, what is it? The New England area, people from the North Midlands, not just the middle of the country, but the North Midlands specifically. And then people from Western United States, um, those people from those three areas, I would also include Florida in that generally, um, are the ones who are the least likely to be perceived as having an accent. They will sound neutral. Now, the exact sounds that I use, like I use the cot merger, so that's one sound to me, where somebody from, say, Illinois, right, they might not use the cot merger and they're going to use ah and aw. Okay. So is there a difference in the exact pronunciation that we have? Yes. Do we both sound neutral? Yes. Okay. That's the thing about American English. So if we're talking about accents within that context, then that's a different thing. But if we're talking about accents like from another language sort of affecting your pronunciation in English, then yeah, you got to have all those pieces in place. Otherwise, you know, you won't sound like a native exactly. You might sound close, but not native. At least not the way that we would generally think to perceive it, right? Because obviously, if you're bilingual, you grew up speaking both languages. How you speak is native, right? It's just if it's a little bit colored by Spanish or Japanese or whatever, like that's just part of your specific native speech. Like you're still a native, it's still perfectly valid. It's just not necessarily what we would expect based on general American, what we're used to hearing. Um, anyway, I think Winder meant whether on can ever be reduced to the schwa plus n. Yeah, well, that's kind of what I was. What I was saying is like in could be reduced to n or just n, where on we probably wouldn't reduce it all the way to n. But as long as the context is clear, as I said, where like in isn't particularly an option, you can reduce on to un. Yes. If you reduce it all the way to n, like you probably have to be speaking really, really fast, like a picture on the wall, picture on the wall, picture on the wall. That's okay, but yeah. Again, I probably wouldn't really reduce it anyway. I would just say like a nice small sound on picture on the wall, picture on the wall, picture on the wall. How about the pronunciation? It was, or what was it? Is the letter T before W a silent letter when you speak very fast? Okay, good question about the T's here. So T's at the end of words. Let me do this because I was answering a question about similar to this earlier. Uh, a T sound, when a T is at the end of a word, it is probably the single most common sound in American English that might disappear. It doesn't have to disappear, but it's probably the single most common sound that does that at the end of a word. And sometimes that's because of other sounds like ST. Usually the S will kind of just make the T disappear. It doesn't have to. But especially if it's a grammar word like it, and it's not the end of the sentence where we're probably going to stop it, like it was, okay, there are several possible right answers here. Okay. You can say enunciate everything. You can say it was. That's unlikely because we're not usually going to enunciate things like that. So that is possible. That's one way you say the T. It's a light, like a soft, weak T. It was. You could say it was. It was. That in this particular case, we're probably going to cancel out because of historical reasons. We won't worry about that. Um, we can stop the T. We can say it was, it was, it was. That's very, very common doing the stop. Or we actually have the option of dropping the T and say it was, it was, it was, especially in fast speech, but even in normal speech, it was. Right? Now, again, if you slow down, or for some reason you're trying to speak more clearly, like, it was, right? You're trying to emphasize that, like, you don't believe me, but I'm saying, no, it was. Then we're more likely either to still keep that stop or even push out the T. As I said, it's a dynamic range and flow depending on what you're saying, why you're saying it. With what was it? Okay. Uh, so obviously the T at the end with it, that's probably just going to be stopped, most likely. But the T at the end of what, same exact thing here. So you can say what was, okay? Probably not going to take the time to enunciate it like that, but it's possible. You can say what was and do a stop, particularly a glottal stop. Or you can say what was. What was it? What was it? Especially when we have two W's close, like what and was or where was. If there's like a tear, like in what, is super common that we're just going to into that W because that allows us to speak so much faster, right? What was it? What was it? What? So I'm literally saying "wha" and "wha." It's exactly the same. I'm just repeating "wha," saying it twice. Yeah, what was it? So yeah, good questions. But it's part of a dynamic range and flow. There's not just one answer there. For chassis, do you use a regular CH as in cheap or the fancy CH of chauffeur? Okay, good question. I'm going to fix this. If not for your sake, because you may already know this, I'm sure you probably don't, then for the sake of other people who are here, because this is a good point. Remember how I'm saying focus on your ears, not on your eyes. So there are some words, usually words of French origin, like chef or chauffeur, spelled with the CH in English, because we kind of just, I assume we just took the spelling from French, um, that are not pronounced with a CH sound, right? What we refer to in English when we call the CH sound is ch. Okay, you start in T and you push the SH through the T and it creates ch. Um, in the word chauffeur, that is not a CH sound. Okay, I wouldn't even just I wouldn't even describe it as a fancy CH. It is an SH sound. Shh. Okay. So it's spelled with a CH, but in no way, shape, or form is it any form of CH. It is an SH. Okay. So chassis is pronounced with a CH sound, not an SH sound. Chassis would, that sounds weird. Chassis, yeah. Actually sounds almost like a name, sort of chassis. Yeah, but a chassis, chassis. Of course, notice that S at the end is silent. Usually S's aren't silent, but this is a case where we have a silent S. Um, Maxim, welcome. I don't know if you made any comments today so far. I thought I saw you earlier, but I guess not. Either way, welcome. I think it's next to impossible to sound like a native. You have to live in the environment for 10 to 15 years to acquire that truly native-like accent. Matt versus Japan. Idausen Ness. Luca Lampariello. I mean, these are people who prove that wrong. So, does it help to live in the environment for an extended period of time? Absolutely. Absolutely. It can do nothing but help you. Now, it doesn't guarantee it's going to help you because you can create a language bubble in a foreign country and, like speak with other people who speak your language. Um, so just moving to another country doesn't guarantee anything. And even then, we're talking about pronunciation, which pronunciation is not absorbed by adults. Okay, this is another reason why this idea is not quite right, that you have to be in the environment for 10 to 15 years, because pronunciation is not absorbed by adults. It's absorbed by children, but it's not absorbed by adults. There may be some form of absorption a little bit, especially as if you try to approximate, like, okay, maybe say like you're an English speaker, you're learning Spanish, you hear that obviously like the R, right? The tapped R. So you say pero, right? Now some English speakers aren't going to care, they're just going to use an English R anyway, which sounds so annoying, and say pero. Um, but I think a lot of English speakers who are learning Spanish would at least try to do that sound and say pero, pero. Even if it doesn't sound perfect, you're trying to approximate and get it close, right? Um, so there's going to be some things that you can more or less notice and adjust to, but you'll still have like an accent, right? If you say like gringo, gringo, right, instead of gringo, gringo, um, it's gonna that English O instead of O is gonna stand out, right? And it'll give you an accent. But pronunciation is not absorbed for the most part. It is acquired through noticing, through shadowing, through minimal pairs, trying to hear the difference between. To France, 15 years, it's very rarely that there's going to be some sounds, right? Um, Possible. And then for me, somebody who has a bit of this, okay, if I don't consciously try to notice, which I naturally would, because number one, I like to, and number two, I account for it. But if for some reason I intentionally tried to avoid like the pronunciation, or I just really didn't care to like train my ears for something here and I didn't do any work with that, I could easily spend 15 years and never hear the difference between those sounds, let alone develop the right pronunciation. So, um, and then, as I said, Matt First Japan. So not only you can look up his YouTube channel, and especially look up the interview that was just posted recently, Matt First Japan interview with the channel What I've Learned. Matt First Japan, What I've Learned. If you type that in, you'll probably find the interview. It was just posted, like, I think this week. Super good interview. It's like an hour long, but it's really, really interesting. And one of the things that he talks about is like the pitch accent, because like you can develop in Japanese, you can master the sounds, you can master everything, but if you don't get the pitch accent right, you're not going to be, you're not going to sound like a native, right? And when Matt, for a while when he was first doing Japanese, he didn't know about pitch accent. And then it was later, right? Because he would talk to his Japanese friends in Japanese, and they're like, you sound really, really good, but your intonation is off. And by intonation, they meant pitch accent because they didn't know what the term was. It's just like something sounds a little bit wrong. And so he started studying it and actually consciously trying to develop the pitch accent. And now, which you can see this at the beginning of the video for the interview, they put some clips of him where he's like speaking to Japanese speakers. And if they don't see him, because he's a white guy, if they don't see him, they assume he's a native. He sounds exactly like native, and he developed, I think, pretty much like almost all of his Japanese ability um, outside of Japan, right? He didn't spend like 15 years in Japan trying to like master, all the sounds and the pitch accent and everything. He got it relatively quickly. And I say relatively, like it wasn't quick, but anyway, you can learn more there. Idausanes also, he loves pronunciation. He's one of the polyglots that I talk about a lot, and um, he was speaking German to somebody in Germany, not having lived there for 10, 15 years. He was just there. I don't know how long he was there, but I think he was only there maybe for like a year at the most. I don't remember the exact time frame, but it wasn't super long like that. The German speaker, after talking to him for a few minutes, was like, "Oh, what part of Germany are you from?" Right. And so you could always say, "Oh, well, these are special people who, like, oh, they have, this special talent. And so that's why it's possible for them and this and that." But as I said, in my opinion, talent just gives you a head start and maybe determines certain things like how fast you can go, maybe how far you can go, depending on the skill that we're talking about. But definitely the idea that you have to be in the environment for, a decade to acquire a native like accent, I think is, which I'm not, you know, trying to like shoot you down or be rude in any way, but I think it's complete nonsense. Uh, Complete nonsense. If you have the right training, if you know what to do, if you don't know what to do, then yes, it could take you that long if you have no idea what you're doing. But if you know what to do, if you know the techniques, right, and you, which is all the tools I'm trying to give you, um, I mean, you could potentially within 6 months to a year sound like a native, potentially. That's going to vary from person to person. That's going to vary on how consistent you are and this and that. And there's lots of factors there. But 6 months to a year, yeah, I think the average person could probably develop a native like or even native accent. Um, Nandin, it really depends on. Oh, wait, it really depends. I know people who've been learning English as a second language since they were little kids, and they still have a foreign accent. PewDiePie is a good example of this. Yeah, I've noticed this in people from Scandinavian countries. Well, see, that's actually sort of a special case. That is true, but well, in Scandinavian countries, they have a very high emphasis on learning English, which of course a lot of countries do, but many countries fail. Like, I mean, everybody in Japan learns English, and yet the average Japanese speaker can't speak English. um, so, say in Sweden, they have the right environment where they're actually exposed, to the language itself, not just like learning it in grammar books and taking tests and stuff, which is largely what they do in Japan. Um, but the English that they tend to be exposed to, obviously, there's some from America and from Britain and all this stuff, so they do get other exposure. But because there are already a lot of, say, Swedish speakers or Scandinavian country speakers who speak English with an accent, they have a certain sort of threshold where now the young people are primarily in their day-to-day life getting exposed to that particular accent of English. And so even if they're not necessarily native speakers, maybe they started as a little kid, but they didn't start like from birth. Um, they're going to adopt the accent that's around them, right? So if I had, a kid, but I always spoke with a Southern accent, you know, like obviously, I mean, they're going to be exposed to other things, but let's say I'm the only person that they ever hear, right? And I speak with a Southern accent all the time. They're going to learn how to speak exactly like this, the exact way that I'm speaking right now. That's the only reference they have, and this is exactly how they're going to start to speak, right? Um, so I think that's a bit of a special case. Um, but PewDiePie's pronunciation is actually super, super good. Super good. There's some words he says that are very obvious where he has an accent, and he does sort of have a little bit of like kind of a very minor general accent, but like I've listened to PewDiePie a lot because I was like obsessed with his channel for a period of time a few years ago. Um, I was watching like his daily uploads and everything. That was back during the T series thing, and yeah, he generally sounds very 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 good, very very good. Um, So anyway, I think the bottom line is you need to spend a considerable amount of time surrounded by native speakers. There are people going to international schools in countries where English isn't the main language and they can sound native. Native real life input for extended periods of time is super helpful. Yes, a considerable amount of time surrounded by natives. That helps. I wouldn't necessarily put it that way. Because, like, okay, look at it this way. Let's say I couldn't do a Southern accent, right? Or let's say a New York, because I can't really do a very good New York accent. Actually, no, even better. Let's do Australian. So Australians speak English, obviously. Um, my Australian accent sucks. Now, let's say that I want to have a perfect Australian accent. Now, yes, of course, it's a different language. It's not exactly the same, and that's very loud. I really hate that car. It's not 100% the same. I get the argument there, but at the end of the day, I think that these are similar enough to where it doesn't really matter. If I wanted to develop that Australian accent, I don't have to go to Australia, right? I can listen to the accent. I can shadow it. I can make little adjustments in my tongue. Perhaps get feedback from an Australian from time to time. That could help because maybe I think I'm doing things well and I'm not. Um, all the same things that I tell you guys to do. Exactly the same things, even though it's English to English instead of English or some other language to English. It's exactly the same tools, exactly the same process. It's just obviously because it's within the same language, there's less of a barrier. But if it were Spanish or Japanese or German or whatever, like I don't have to go and spend a considerable amount of time surrounded by speakers of that language. If I have enough audio of native speakers, on the internet or whatever, obviously there's exposure. You could say maybe that's surrounded by natives. Fine, okay, whatever, that fits the criteria. But I have the exposure to the language. I'm using the shadowing. I'm using the techniques. I don't have to go and live in a country for 5 years, 10 years just to acquire an accent. It's very scientific, very mechanical, very black and white with, you either hit the sound or you don't. And yes, there's a bit of a range, especially in American English for a lot of sounds, but you can find that range, right? You can find the pinpoint and the range around it, and then put things together just like a native would. You can figure out how to do that with your tongue. I think for pronunciation, it's just a lot of these techniques are either ignored or people don't care about them or whatever. Like, I don't know what these researchers are doing. I don't sit around reading research papers all the time, but I think a lot of the idea of like, oh, you need to, move to the country or it's just impossible to develop a native accent, all this stuff. Um, it's like, no, if you have the right tools, you have the right techniques, the average person can either get very close to sounding like a native or can reach uh, the native station. At least that's my belief. I could be. But the input is super, 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 super important, of course. Farouk, Farouk Erfan. I'm probably saying that horribly. Farouk, very more like that. Farouk. Anyway, hello, welcome. I know this was probably a little while ago. Finally, but yes, welcome. Nandan, to retract a message, you can if you want. It's your choice, but there are, or if you make a mistake and you're like, that's okay, right? If I correct it, so but it's your choice. You can always retract whatever you want. The Smoke Criminal, which, by the way, guys, we're at 3 hours on this stream, plus a little bit from the previous stream. It's already 2:37. I'm gonna go until 3 o'clock, which is in 23 minutes. So we are going to be finishing up here, just so everybody's aware. How much time should I be dedicating? God, we're 3 hours. It's ridiculous. How much time should I be dedicating to working on my pronunciation or accent on a daily basis? Good question. Well, the number one most important thing is that you are working on it on a daily basis. Okay. The exact amount of time isn't the fact that you're doing it every day. Now, I will add also, if you start to feel a little burned out, if you start to feel a little overwhelmed, I would consider adding one day of the week. I had to do this with Spanish. One day of the week where you just don't do anything with the language, like at all, or at the very least, nothing with pronunciation. Okay, because I had a lot of time when I was doing Spanish, um, and so that was like the thing that I was doing most of the day and stuff. And I found that if I didn't take one day off every week, I would just start to hate it, and I didn't want to do it anymore. So keep that in mind. But generally, you want to be really consistent on a pretty much daily basis. It's really easy to let that slide and say, well, what's one day off? No, don't fall into that. Maybe one day off a week if you need it. Otherwise, every day. Okay. Um, but how much time every day? This does also depend a bit on where you currently are, um, how much work you need, right? Like how different are the sounds in your language? Uh, some particular sounds might also take a really long time to get. And so if you're only doing, say, 30 minutes a day, then for, that particular sound, it's longer than if you were working on like an hour a day or whatever. Now you can there and do, like hours and hours and hours, any type of pronunciation. You can maybe do different types of pronunciation activities in an hour, and that's fine. But much, right? I strongly recommend the Pomodoro technique, Pomodoro, which is where you set a timer, and it's supposed to be for, what is it, 25 minutes? Yeah, 25 minutes on, and then a 5-minute break. And then after 4 of those, you take a 15-minute break. I played with that myself. It does improve your learning. But for me, I find it better to do 30 minutes on, and then 5 to 10 minutes off. So the exact thing, it depends. But if you have some sort of where like, okay, you're focused for a period, you take a break. You're focused for a period, you take a break. That's going to be super, super useful for you for a number of reasons. But let's say you only have 30 minutes a day, then that's fine. Just do that 30 minutes a day. I very strongly recommend, especially for grammar and for pronunciation, to bracket your day. Right, these are brackets. But to bracket your day, I guess I should put a space there. It looks better. Where, say, you wake up in the morning, it doesn't have to be right when you wake up, but in the morning, you do, say, some pronunciation work, like, say, you're shadowing a particular sentence. And then in the evening, you go back and you review and you do that same stuff that you did in the morning with like the same material, um, especially for pronunciation. And then the next day, I mean, maybe you can switch it to something else, or you can do the same thing, for 2 days, whatever. But regardless, if you bracket your day with like the same or similar activities, it's going to help like soak into your subconscious, because as you're sleeping, right, the last thing you do before you go to sleep, or towards, doesn't have to be the last thing, but it tends to go towards your subconscious. Your brain is working on it, it's processing it, and then you wake up in the morning, oh, there you go, right? It's nice and fresh for your brain. And then as you go through your day, right, it's still processing in the subconscious. So bracketing your day when you're learning stuff is super, super useful. So like maybe if you do, you could even do, say, 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes in the evening, like as a minimum. That would probably be good. If you're doing, say, like 5 minutes a day, like that's not really going to be enough. It's really not, especially like if you want to develop like a really, really good native like accent or a native accent. 5 minutes a day is not going to cut it. It's not going to cut it. So if you do longer periods, break it up either throughout the day or by putting little breaks in between it. Minimum, I would say 30 minutes a day, which can be broken into 2 sessions or whatever you want to do. You can even do 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes, like throughout the day if you wanted. But, and different people, maybe that'll work better for some people than others. So if it doesn't seem to be working for you, make an adjustment, maybe increase your time a little bit, or whatever it is. But yeah, don't go below that. And then outside of that, it comes down to what activities you're doing, right? Because some activities are going to take a little bit longer, but some activities may be more powerful for certain things, right? So if you're working on basic sounds, You could easily spend like 5 minutes there, like repeating the same sound and trying to make little adjustments, and next thing you know, 5 minutes has passed and you don't even realize it. Where if you're trying to like shadow a sentence and get like all the sounds perfect, all the intonation, all the stress like 100% exactly the same, um, or trying to shadow the same sentence, which I don't recommend to do with piece, definitely do that, but you could do that. uh, and um, but no more than say 45 minutes to an hour at a time. Like that's going to be too much. You have to break it up for sure at that point. Nandan Mel Gibson first spoke with an American accent, then with an Australian accent, and later on he reverted to an American accent. Interesting. I didn't notice that. Or I didn't know that. So there you go. Like, anyway, to everyone who is struggling with confidence, did I miss anything? I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. No. Okay, so to everyone who's struggling with confidence issues, here's a story. I've been learning how to drive these days, and while I was driving, I asked myself, what is the worst thing that can happen to me? Well, if you're driving, that's a lot of really bad things can happen, but that's okay. Let's go. If I get it wrong, the answer is easy. I get into an accident and die. Yeah, but I'm not going to die if I make a mistake in English, so I'm good. Perfect. Yes, it's all relative, right? Like if you make a mistake in English, pronunciation mistake, grammar mistake, vocabulary mistake, whatever, uh, you're not going to die. You might feel like you're going to die if you're really embarrassed and you say something that was like really out of place or something, and you get misunderstood, but you're not going to die. Yeah. So very good, very good. And most of the time, it's not really going to be a big deal anyway. Like we're so hard on ourselves. Like that's the thing. When we're learning something, it could be a language with the grammar, the pronunciation. It could be a musical instrument. Like we're so hard on ourselves where we're like, no, like it's not right. Right? You have problems, and like as far as language goes, it's the base is communication. That is the most important point. If you want to have a good or perfect pronunciation, as possible, it's extra, right? You can do that, but communication is the base. And so, as for like if you're playing guitar and you don't play it right, it's just going to sound bad. So your communication is not good, right? But in language, we can still, as long as you're saying things well enough and you're using grammar, vocabulary well enough, we can understand you, and that's the main thing we care about. So you definitely don't have to be as hard on yourself when you're learning a language. And of course, you're going to make mistakes. So just make them. Try to learn from them if you can. But it is what it is. So very good, Lily. Yes, thank you for that example and words of encouragement for everybody. Which, by the way, I really like your your profile picture here. Just grumpy cat. Or it looks like grumpy cat. But okay, thank you so much for your amazing tips. Your channel is simply the best. Well, thank you very much. Glad I can help. I'm also a soon-to-be driver. Yeah, I know, it's so funny. One of my roommates just got her license like I think like last month or something, and I taught her how to drive. Yes, I'm so great. Um, but I got my license when I was actually wasn't even 18 yet. It was like right before I turned 18. So I've been driving for how old am I? I think I'm going to be 32. That sounds about right. Yeah. So was that like 15, 14 years? A number? I don't know. I don't do math. 14 sounds right. So I've been driving for a while. But how do you make a D plus voiced TH? Good question. Oh, God. Uh, yeah, so D plus voice TH. Well, there's a trick that we do to make that easier. If you're enunciating, then we're going to have D and TH. So if I say bad, it's a voice to TH. So say bad that, right? It's bad that happened. Okay. Um, you can clearly push out the T or the D and the TH. Okay. Bad that. Bad that. It's bad that that happened. Okay. Whatever. And if you want to make it a little clearer, sometimes we'll do that. That's fine. It's not wrong. But that's not the way that we're going to do it normally, because it's actually kind of difficult. You're probably noticing there has to be an easier way to do this, right? Because the D is up here and then the TH is over here, and it's like I have to release the D and then go into the TH, and it's awkward. Even for us natives, it's a bad combination. So what we do, this is one reason why we have the dental D and dental T versions of the TH sounds as replacements, okay? Because now instead of doing bad that, and we're not going to stop the D if you say bad that, it's kind of harder to do still. It's a little easier, but it's kind of hard because we're bad that, right? What we're going to do instead, we're going to use dental D for the TH, and we're actually going to put the D there. So we're going to go here. We're going to do a stop in that position, a voiced stop, which will be interpreted as a stop D, okay, even though it's not in this position. And then when we release it, it's going to be that dental D version of the TH, and we're going to interpret that combination as D plus voiced TH. Bad that, bad that. So we get to easily blend the two by moving the D here, stopping it there, and then releasing that dental D variation of the TH. Again, don't confuse the dental D and the normal D. They're two completely different things. The dental is a replacement for the TH for anybody who is new to that idea. But that's what we're doing. We're sort of blending them together and doing the stop of the D in the position of the dental D. So it's a special case, special combination. But if you do a normal D normally, you can't do it from here. That doesn't work. It's only possible for the stop in combination with the TH variation. Okay. Pomodoro. Yeah. Different people say this a little bit differently. I say pomodoro. Poma, probably poma. Yeah, poma. So not pama, poma. I know some people say pa. Pomodoro. And I actually try to say pomo. That's probably because I know it's Italian for tomato. And so I try to say it more like pomodoro. But other people might say it a little differently. You're welcome, Wendell. I see that down there. You don't have to stay in the country for that long. I know a kid that started speaking English at 12. Now he's 16 and has no accent. Yeah, so in that case, of course, right, different factors depend as well. A little old in terms of what we think of as acquiring, naturally acquiring things at a young age. But yeah, 12 and then 16 4 years later. So he does have the benefit of being younger. That is a factor, right? But that is certainly true. Yes. So very good. It's different when you're a kid. Yes and no. Yes and no. It is and it isn't. His puberty was a bit delayed, though. Maybe that helped. Could be. Yeah. Anyway, I mean, that's a whole area of debate, but being a kid, being younger is a factor, but it's not the determining factor. So, Lily, cool. Good luck to us. I don't know how to tag people here. I don't either. I think it's maybe the @ symbol. Let's see. I say @ Lily. Hi. Yes. Apparently that works. I don't know if you get some sort of notification or something or whatever, but I put @ Lily and your username popped up and I hit enter and then I put hi. So I guess that's how. But yes. Okay, so we're almost out of time here. Let's see. I have a friend who moved to the US at 12, has been there for 6 years, and he still has an accent, but it's very subtle. Yeah, so in that case, everybody is a little bit different, obviously. That's probably the biggest factor from person to person. And as I said, 12 is a little bit old when we're considering the spectrum of like kids absorbing the language. So that's another part of the factor. It's sort of on the like end of that area that we would consider to be kids. So 6 years. Okay, so that's longer than the 4 years of the other person. Still has an accent, but it's very subtle. Possible. I doubt, especially since he moved there when he was 12, I doubt that he did any sort of conscious training because right, kids can absorb the pronunciation. Adults cannot really absorb the pronunciation. As I said earlier, maybe some things here and there you can kind of pick up really easily and notice the difference between, but adults don't absorb the pronunciation like children do. When we're in sort of that transition period to adolescence, right, where it's like kid into teenager, whatever, into adult, there's probably, I would assume, there's a transitionary period, which is going to be a little different from person to person, and it also depends on what talent they may or may not have, or what degree of talent they may or may not have for language and all that stuff. It's, as I said, it's multifactorial. It's very complicated. It depends on a lot of factors, but um, you have a 12-year-old who within 4 years now has no accent, and you have a 12-year-old who within 6 years has a very subtle accent. Um, it seems to me that as we move from children towards teenager, that is that point where probably for the average person, I would even say maybe from like say 10ish or so, 10 to 14 in there. That's probably that period where the ability to absorb the pronunciation starts to go away. And I don't have any hard numbers on this or any research papers, but based on my experience and partially my own ideas and what I've seen and learned, this is what I would deduce and assume. Um, so if you're in that transition period, then if you don't have any sort of conscious attempting to acquire like certain sounds that maybe especially if they're very different from your native language, um, then you might not acquire them because you're already past a certain point where you're now transitioning out of the ability to absorb it, right? And so then you're left with a little bit of an accent. That makes perfect sense to me, right? I don't see anything strange with that. Um, and then, of course, once you get past a certain age, you lose the ability to absorb it, but you don't lose the ability to consciously go in and develop it. So that's my perspective on it anyway. What do you recommend for shadowing? Yes, we need the ing there for shadowing. If you are a woman, you can shadow a woman or men in conversation or TED Talks. Good question. So yeah, these are some of the variables that make shadowing a little complicated on like exactly what to do and all this stuff. There's in skill acquisition and particularly within language learning, there's two types of activities. There are intensive and intensive and extensive. Intensive. I feel like that's wrong. Yeah, intensive and extensive. So intensive, usually you hear this in the context of language learning, specifically in the context of reading. When I was writing a book about how to learn a language, I actually realized that intensive and extensive applies to all areas of language in various forms: speaking, reading, writing, listening, vocabulary development, et cetera, et cetera. Different types of activities. Intensive is where you are spending a lot of your brain's resources over a short period of time, say 5 to 10 minutes, whatever it is, because you only have so much brain power, right? To really focus in on a small amount of material. So what that means is, say, reading, right? The best usual or best common, easiest example. Intensive reading is where you're reading something and every single time you don't know a word, you look it up. Okay. Extensive reading is where obviously you need to know a certain number of words first, and there's a certain percentage that makes extensive reading maybe a little bit more beneficial. But just for simplicity, we won't go into the numbers. Instead of looking up every single word, you're going to read and you're going to just kind of like, okay, if there's a word that you don't understand, okay, that's fine. Maybe try to get it from the context. And you just keep going. Okay, you're not trying to look up every word. You're not trying to learn every little thing. You're just kind of trying to read. And this is a super, super powerful activity that some people get stuck on because they want to know every word. They don't want to be confused. They want to know the meaning of everything. And there's a place for intensive reading. It can be useful, but extensive reading is actually extremely powerful and maybe even more powerful than intensive reading. But that's just within reading. So within shadowing, actually there's intensive shadowing and there's extensive shadowing. Okay. Intensive shadowing is the normal shadowing that you would think of that I usually talk about, where say you have like a sentence and you're going really deep on that sentence. You're trying to make sure all the sounds are good, all the stress is good, the rhythm, everything is like as good as you can make it, right? Very, very intensive, trying to make like a sentence perfect. And you're going to extract a lot of value out of that that's going to transfer, towards the rest of your learning. Where extensive shadowing is actually a newer technique that I sort of realize, and it's based off of something else that it's based off of how Professor Argelis does shadowing, um, and but I sort of tweaked it and adapted it to something a little bit different. And I was going to make a lesson on this, but I want to make the main shadowing lesson first. But extensive shadowing, as I call it, is where you're not focused on getting every little sound perfect. You're not focused on making it sound like 100% perfect in every way. You're focused on the chunking. You're focused on the rhythm. You're focused on the intonation, not the sounds. The sounds don't really matter that much. Okay, so if your sounds are a little off during this exercise, it's fine. But it's to really help to get like the chunking, the pacing, right? Like speeding up within the chunk, slowing down towards the end of the chunk, sort of like I talked about in those lessons. Making sure your intonation is good. A little bit with linking between chunks, maybe, but linking isn't really a big focus there either. It's really on the higher level rhythm, intonation, bit of the stress, especially for the keyword focus word, super stress in each chunk. And it's more about working with like a whole paragraph instead of just like a short sentence, right? So what do I recommend for shadowing? It kind of depends on what you need to work on. It depends on what you like to do. As I said, I'm going to make a whole lesson about shadowing because there's not just one way to do it. What if you want to develop a native like or a perfect accent? According to Luca Lampariello, which his American accent is like 99.99% perfect, but apparently his Spanish accent is like 100% perfect. From what I hear from some Spanish speakers I know. He says that he doesn't shadow, which I assume he just doesn't call it that, and like the activities that he doesn't match what we would normally think of as shadowing. But I'm sure he does some sort of like obviously he's getting it and he's trying to match it. But there's not just one way to shadow. And as I said, it depends on what you need to work on. If it's more sound based, then you're going to want to maybe be a little more intensive. Like if you need to improve your sounds, and even more than that, you don't even want to work with a sentence yet. You want to work with like sounds and words and like syllables, and make sure that those are going really well. Like shadow words. Make little adjustments to the sounds, and then when you get to the higher level with the like a short sentence, like did you see that, or I like dogs, or whatever it is, then you can start adding in like the stress and the rhythm and all these other things while still trying to make sure all the sounds are good and your linking between the words is good. As for man versus woman, in English, I don't think that there's a whole lot of variation. I mean, obviously there's some words that like maybe women might use more than men kind of in a way, but especially compared to a language like Korean or Japanese, like there's not like a way that men speak and a way that women speak. It's like we all just kind of speak English. I'm sure there's some variation and some weird little things here and there, but that doesn't matter too much. But what I would recommend, especially just to be safe or whatever, if you can find sources of women to shadow and you're a woman, just go with that. That's perfectly fine. But I don't think it's going to really negatively impact you very much in English if you're shadowing a man, for example. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. Conversation versus TED Talks, that also is going to depend. If you're trying to match conversational speech, right, what you practice is what improves. What you practice is what improves. So if, for example, you don't want to be having a conversation with somebody in this manner where everything is very nice, clearly enunciated with nice, good pauses, as if I am giving a TED talk. If you don't want to sound like that when you're speaking to somebody, then that's not what you want to shadow. Okay. Now, there's nothing wrong with shadowing TED Talks. TED Talks are a fantastic resource for listening, for vocabulary, for all kinds of things, even pronunciation. But when it comes to, say, your chunking and your overall rhythm, reading and speeches, presentations, have a bit of a different intonation pattern to them. So, like, if I'm reading your comment, like, what do you recommend for shadowing? If you are a woman, you can shadow a woman or men. See, there's a certain intonation that if I say, like, what do you recommend for shadowing? If you're a woman, can you shadow a woman? That's more conversational. Um, so you can still get a lot out of the TED Talks because it can kind of show you like where the lines are between things, and it can help you get used to enunciating clearly. And then in conversational speech, because remember, we use enunciation as a tool. So you don't necessarily want to speak like that all the time, but you can use it as sort of like training wheels. Um, and then which is optionally if you want, and then shadow more conversational sources where things are a little messier, they're not enunciated as much, things are a bit faster, and you're getting into like real speech. Then you can take those training wheels off from the TED Talks and just focus on conversational things. But you don't have to do that. Like that's if you want to. Um, but if you want to sound conversational, I would not just shadow TED Talks. I would also work in some, like say, interviews or things like that, where it's not like super prepared, or even a lot of podcasts are really good sources of input for that because they can be very conversational. So, um, anyway, but I mentioned the extensive shadowing because it depends on what you're going to do, as I said, right? If you're focusing on like the chunking and the higher level stuff, and you're not so worried about all the sounds, for this particular exercise, then whether it's conversational or TED Talks, you want to do more of like an extensive shadowing where if you know that you need to work on the sounds and you're trying to improve your sounds, then you want to do more intensive shadowing, right? Where you're focusing on like a really short like phrase or sentence, and trying to get it like perfect, especially the sound part. Um, okay. Is it just me or linking D and F is really hard? It comes out as an unreleased. Okay, guys, so we are over time. No more questions. I'm going to try to finish this up. I just noticed that we're over time, actually. um, so nothing else, no other questions. Um, we're going to finish this here. Linking D and F. Okay, so it comes out as an unreleased T, I think, as in good for you. No, it is not. Which, by the way, I don't describe it as an unreleased T. I don't think that's the best terminology, but that doesn't matter right now. Good for you. Good. Good. It's a D, not a T. Okay, because there's that voice still. Good for. Good for. Good for. This would actually be a held stop D. Held stop D. Not a glottal stop D. A held stop D. You could do a glottal. Good for you. Good. Good for you. That's possible too. Or of course you could just say good for you and release a little weak soft D there. Good. Good. Good for you. Good for you. All three of those are perfectly fine. There's no problem. Um, we love you. Enjoy your day. Yes, you too. I guess night. It's probably night there. um, thank you very much. Okay. Learn English. I really try. Try to what? Learn English? Pronunciation? I assume. We're here for English, so well, it's good. Keep trying. um, I mean, as I said, no more questions. If you come back next week, we can maybe explore a bit about what you're trying, how you're trying it, and talk more about that. Finn, do you think my friend would be considered a native speaker, meaning he would have two native languages because his English is really good? Nobody can tell. I'm curious now. What does native mean? Okay, so you're saying so he didn't grow up speaking the language. Because I guess that's the guy you mentioned earlier, right? At 12. So then, no, by definition, he is not a native speaker. Right? A native speaker, just because you can fool a native doesn't mean you're a native speaker, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't be fooling a native. Like me speaking to a native, I'm not fooling anybody. I am a native speaker. Um, which now I guess we're kind of splitting hairs, because if you can speak, if you can use the grammar, the vocabulary, the pronunciation and the intonation and everything, if you can use it to the point where a random native speaker, like any given random native speaker, won't be able to tell, you might as well be a native, right? Like, what's the difference at that point? It doesn't matter. Um, but technically, he's not a native. And I wouldn't, like, if it were me, I wouldn't want to claim to be a native, because it's like, that's like, wow, like I can fool natives. That's amazing. That's like a badge of honor. Like, yeah, I accomplished something. Um, so I wouldn't call him native. No. You're welcome, Roger. Okay, let's see if we can finish these here. Wender, auxiliary verbs like are, can, have at the initial position in a sentence are reduced with schwa or not. Can you be? Are you serious? They can be, yes. For have, well, have is a main verb, of course. No, but have, like in the present perfect. Have you done it? Have you done it? Yeah. Um, they can be. They can be reduced to schwas. But it kind of, it's not such a simple answer. Can, yes, the positive can, not negative can't, but the positive can. That's a short, easy answer. Either kun or kin with I. Those are two perfectly fine reductions. No problem. We will usually say it that one of those two ways. For R, like if R is the first word, that's very loud. I wouldn't make it straight into a schwa. God, why is it so loud? I want to make sure you guys can still hear me. I don't know what's going on outside, but so I wouldn't say like, oh yeah, are you serious? Are you serious? Like that doesn't sound right. Okay. Now instead of saying R, you can reduce the R colored fifth vowel R into just the vowel. Are you serious? Are you serious? And that's perfectly fine. If R isn't the first word, like if I say, what are you doing? I can say, what are you doing? And the R can reduce all the way from R to to whata. That's fine. Yes. So it's not always a yes or no answer. It depends. With have, like like have you seen it? Right? Have you seen it? Have you seen it? Have you seen it? If I'm trying to do a schwa, it seems a little bit like I'm sure it probably comes out that way in fast speech sometimes, but I'm gonna say it's possible, but it just seems kind of weird to me. Like if I try to do it that way, so maybe like a really lazy like have you, have you instead of right? So I would say kind of, sort of, maybe yes or no, but and have in the present perfect will usually reduce anyway, so or contract, and that wouldn't be a problem. Yeah. Um, Nandan, I know I've been picky about this, but I've done my research. I also know a guy who's been listening to English since childhood, but he never started to speak till his late teens, and he sounds almost like a native. Yeah, the Map vs. Japan interview would also be interesting for you, because the exposure helps a lot. See, Matt didn't start until he was a teenager. Besides that, like he was doing like six, but he was doing, and he wasn't using titles, but he was also focused a lot on listening. He was watching a lot of anime, of course, watching the news, watching dramas, commercials, like everything that a Japanese speaker would be exposed to through the media, he was consuming, like constantly. And he says that that's one of the reasons why, like, he's able to use the language so well. Actually, he spent, I think, as I said, it was like 2 years, like not even really working too much. I don't know, maybe but he didn't really worry about it. And then he said that it took him only like 1 or 2 weeks to become fluent in the spoken language. And that was because he had so much input already built up of like what sounds good and what doesn't sound good, that he wasn't always, of course, but like whenever he wanted to say something in Japanese, he had already heard so many phrases and so many things that it kind of just like came up from his subconscious. And sometimes he would have more than one option, but he would kind of just pick the one that he felt seemed the most Japanese. um, and he was able to start speaking the language really, really quickly. And of course, I already said his pronunciation is like super spot on. Pitch accent is perfect. People think he's a native; they don't see him, et cetera, et cetera. And he started, I think, when he was like 16 or 17. And so, yeah, like the input is the key, right? No matter what you're doing, even if you take a speak from day one, like Benny Lewis, right, where he starts learning a language by speaking like straight on the first day and just speaks as much as he can. That's a perfectly valid approach, and it's a very, very fast approach, although it takes a lot of brain power and melts your brain constantly, and it's very stressful. But it's a perfectly valid approach that does work. It's probably the fastest way to learn a language if you really need to learn it quickly. Um, but even in that case, obviously, like if he doesn't know, say he's trying to speak Polish and he wants to say, "Hi, my name is Benny," and he doesn't know the words "Hi, my name is," he needs that input. He needs to at least see the words and try to say them or something. There's always input is always the base in one way or another, right? Doesn't matter when you start speaking or whatever, the input is always going to be super, super important, and the more input is obviously going to be the better. um, but yeah, so I don't see anything strange with that. That's all perfectly within the normal realm of language learning. um, and also, can you also reduce the words I and my in a sentence? I and my. Yes, you can. There's probably more than one way to do this, but the short, easy, standard answer that I will give you for reducing them is so these both use the I diphthong, and I'm actually going to make a lesson on this too. It's going to be part of the main course. It's what I call cutting the diphthong. Not even typing. Cutting the diphthong. Nope. Yep. Okay. Cutting the diphthong. And what that means is where you are going to basically say the first part of the diphthong and then you're not going to finish it. So you're going to cut off the end of it. Okay. So instead of saying I, you're going to say ah, ah, ah. Okay. And remember, this ah sound only exists in the diphthong. For I and ow, it doesn't exist as a basic individual sound like ah or ah. So if you do that, if I say like I don't know, right? Ah, I don't know. I don't know. Ah, ah, ada, 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 ada. I don't know. Now in that case, I'm going up to the D, and so I could easily hit a bit of the I. But let's see if I go I care, right? So I'm going all the way to the back. I care. I care. I care, I care, I care, I care, I care. And the cut could be completely cutting off the end of it, or it could be to where like maybe you get a little bit partway through it or halfway to it, without actually completing the diphthong. Same thing with my, so like my car, my car, my car, my car, my car, my car. But it's fast. If I slow it down, if I start enunciating, if I start speaking more clearly, you can't do that. Remember, because that's part of the function of English. In order to speak faster, we reduce, we get lazy. But if we want to emphasize, we want to speak clearly, then the reason why we slow down, the reason why we emphasize is to make it clear. And so we're not going to reduce anymore, right? We're going to actually say it the way it's supposed to be. So I don't like it. He might, but I don't, right? Or, oh, that's my car. Okay. Not my car. That sounds weird. Yeah, Lucas Spanish is perfect. Sounds like a Spaniard. Yeah, that's what one of my students from Spain said. So obviously, I'm not the best judge of his Spanish because I'm not a native Spanish speaker. But um, yeah, his English. A lot of people say his English is like perfect, like 100%. But according to my ears, I'd give it 99.9, like super, super, super close. But every once in a while, there's just something that kind of is a little bit off that stands out. But if I'm not really paying attention to his pronunciation, I'm just like listening to him, I don't really notice anything. It's only if I'm like listening. So, okay, and we finished. Yay! You're welcome, Sylvia. You're welcome, Roger. You're welcome, Finn. Everybody is welcome. All right, this was a longer one. I'm trying to keep these shorter because I do have things to do, but time passed. We had an interruption earlier and we got off track. So here we are. That's fine. Any other questions for next time? Go ahead and wait till next time. If you want to leave the comments here so that you don't forget them, you can do that after I end the stream. And I'll probably just try to answer them if I can in the text. But yeah. So I will see you guys next week around the same time. And thank you all for joining and spending the afternoon with me. So have a good week and weekend and all that.